Welcome, my family. Before we jump in, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. I'd also love to know, where are you watching from and what time is it there? Please hype me on YouTube. Thanks. I was 28 when the first letter from Julian Thorne arrived at my mother's house in Ashland, Oregon, a place he shouldn't have known I'd moved back to after the breakup that ruined my 20s. The envelope sat alone on the kitchen table that morning, edges too crisp, paper too white, like whoever handled it wore gloves. The handwriting stopped me cold, those looping, careful strokes I used to trace with my finger on the margins of our high school notebooks. I'd always thought the softness of his handwriting contradicted the intensity behind his eyes. I was wrong. Mom was rinsing blueberries at the sink, humming like she always did when she was trying not to worry. "Something wrong?" she asked without turning around. I didn't answer. I opened the letter. "Tomorrow, you'll wake at 6:17. You'll make tea instead of coffee. You'll wear the blue sweater you keep in the second drawer." The words didn't make sense at first. They hung in my mind like floating insects, circling but refusing to land. I kept rereading the lines until the kitchen seemed to tilt a little, like the floor wasn't as even as I'd always assumed. Mom said my name again, sharper this time. "Elena?" "I'm fine," I lied, folding the letter so quickly the paper crackled. I stuffed it in my pocket and forced myself to breathe normally. I barely slept that night. The house had that old Oregon smell, pine boards, damp foundation, the faint sweetness of decaying leaves stuck to the gutters. Shadows moved differently when you were awake for them. By 4 a.m., every creak felt intentional. At 6:17 exactly, my eyes snapped open. Not a gentle waking. I jerked awake like someone had leaned over my bed and whispered directly into my ear. My heartbeat thudded inside my throat, and for a moment I couldn't remember where I was. The floral curtains, the chipped dresser from my teenage years, the faint hum of Mom's space heater down the hall. Everything looked too familiar and too strange at once. I swung my legs out of bed and froze. The tea kettle sat on the stove. I hadn't put it there last night. My coffee tin, always tucked beside the sugar, was gone. And when I opened my dresser drawer, the blue sweater was no longer folded inside. It lay on top, perfectly smooth, like it had been ironed. I swallowed so hard it hurt. "No," I whispered to the empty room. No, I'm not doing this." I forced myself to make coffee anyway, using the emergency jar Mom kept above the microwave, the one she only cracked open during winter storms. I wore a gray hoodie, not the sweater. For a few hours I felt victorious, stupidly victorious, until the second letter arrived 3 days later. Mom found it in the mailbox. "From that same person," she said softly, setting it beside my plate. Maybe you should talk to someone about this?" I didn't answer. My fingers shook when I slid the letter open. "You'll go for a walk at 4:52 p.m. You'll stop when you see the green mailbox. You'll think of me." I pressed the paper flat on the table, trying to steady my breath. "He doesn't know my schedule," I said, half to Mom, half to myself. But he did. That afternoon, the main road closed for construction. Something neither of us knew was planned. Traffic redirected down the side street with the old green mailbox. I tried to turn around, but the workers waved me through. And when I passed the abandoned house next door, its windows black, its shutters hanging like broken lashes, I saw him. A silhouette, perfectly still behind the cracked glass of the upper floor. He wasn't watching traffic. He was watching me. Mom admitted that night, quietly, reluctantly, that she'd heard footsteps in that abandoned house for weeks. "I didn't want to worry you," she whispered. "You've been through enough." Cold spilled through me in an instant. She'd known something was wrong, and I'd been walking past that house every other day like a sleepwalker. I didn't think. I grabbed a flashlight, shoved my feet into boots, and crossed the overgrown yard. The air smelled like mildew and something coppery beneath it. Blood, or rust, or both. The back door was warped but unlocked, opening with a soft sigh, like it was grateful to be used again. Dust clung to the walls and fuzzy gray sheets, and every step stirred the stale air, making my throat itch. The house felt wrong, not haunted wrong, observed wrong. Every corner felt recently vacated, like someone had stepped just out of sight a second before I arrived. My skin prickled, my scalp tightening as I forced myself toward the basement door. The stairs were steep and old, the wood soft from moisture. I gripped the railing, even though it felt dusty and warm, too warm. At the bottom, my flashlight beam jittered across shelves lined with photos. Me, from middle school, from college, from last week. Photos taken through windows, from behind fences, from tree lines. Some printed on fresh glossy paper, others torn from something older. My missing hair ties hung from nails like charms. My pay stubs were arranged in chronological order. There was even a grocery receipt I'd thrown away 2 days earlier, still creased exactly how I'd crumpled it. And in the center of the room sat a single chair, wooden, plain, positioned to face the shrine. When I touched the seat, it was warm. Someone had just been there. I didn't remember screaming, but Mom swore later that she heard it from the living room. The police arrived within 20 minutes. They searched the house while Mom stood beside me in the overgrown yard, holding my hand so tight my fingers tingled. I kept glancing at the upstairs window, half expecting the silhouette to appear again. 2 officers came back up the basement stairs, their boots heavy, their expressions flat. "Ma'am," the older one said, "there's nothing down there." For a heartbeat, I couldn't understand the words. "What do you mean, nothing?" The younger officer shrugged. "No photos, no documents, no personal items. It's just an empty basement." "That's not possible," I whispered. "I saw..." But the older cop raised his hand gently. "We believe you believe it, but we can't report something that isn't there." I pushed past them before they could stop me, rushing down the stairs so quickly I nearly slipped. The basement was empty, shelves bare, floor swept, walls clean except for peeling paint and water damage. The air didn't even smell the same. It was colder, sharper, like someone had opened a window hours earlier and left it that way. But the chair was still there, a single wooden chair centered exactly where I'd found it. I stepped closer and saw something resting on the seat, a note. My breath caught when I recognized the handwriting. "I need a bigger room." I backed away so fast I hit the wall. "He was here. He was just here." The older officer exhaled, long and tired. "We'll file a report. That's all we can do." That night, I didn't sleep. Not even for a minute. Every creak of the house felt like footsteps. Every shift of wind outside felt like someone brushing past the siding. Mom sat with me on the couch until dawn, both of us wrapped in blankets but still shivering. By morning, I'd made my decision. "I'm leaving," I told her, voice hoarse. "Today." She didn't argue. She barely nodded. She just helped me pack. I drove north until Ashland became a memory in the rearview mirror. I didn't stop until I reached a motel off I-5 near Salem, someplace with buzzing lights and carpets that smelled like old cigarettes. The woman at the counter gave me a room near the end of the hall. I slept with the lights on. At 3:12 a.m., someone tapped lightly on the wall behind the headboard. Not knocking. Tapping. 3 slow, delicate taps, like fingertips. I held my breath until the silence felt thick enough to suffocate me. In the morning, a letter waited outside my door. No stamp, no address. Just my name written in looping, familiar handwriting. I opened it inside the bathroom, hands trembling over the sink. "You'll look over your shoulder 3 times before getting into your car. You'll leave at 10:04 a.m. You'll keep driving north." I crumpled the letter and threw it away. I didn't want to follow anything he dictated. But at 10:04 a.m., I found myself standing at my car, checking behind me once, twice, 3 times, because the hallway felt too quiet, and the reflection in the motel window looked like someone else's shadow moved behind mine. I drove to another town, then another, then another. But the letters still found me, sometimes placed under my windshield, sometimes slid under hotel doors, once left on the driver's seat of my locked car. Each script described something I would eventually do, whether I intended to or not. Sometimes they described things I hadn't even considered doing until after I'd read them, and that realization terrified me in a way I can't untangle. Was he predicting me, guiding me, or pushing me toward the version of myself he wanted? Last night, in a new apartment in a new city, I found a letter taped inside my bedroom closet. No knock, no break-in, just there. "You'll read this before bed. You'll lie awake listening for footsteps. You'll wonder if I'm already in the house. You'll think about the basement. You'll remember the warmth of the chair. I'm not watching from the basement anymore. I'm somewhere closer. Right now, my apartment is silent. Too silent. The kind of silence that feels occupied. And as I write this, hands shaking, breath shallow, I realize something far worse. The final line of the letter wasn't written like an instruction. It was written like a promise. "I'm writing your tomorrow before you live it, Elena." I was 26 when I heard Caleb Vance's whistle outside my Denver apartment, a soft, lilting nursery rhyme drifting through the dusk like it had been practicing for me. I didn't even realize I'd stopped breathing until the key slipped from my fingers and pinged off the concrete. That childish little tune, Little Boy Blue, threaded between the apartment doors, soft enough to sound imagined, sharp enough to cut straight through 10 years of distance I'd built like armor. The hallway smelled like fried onions from someone's dinner, the walls a dull beige that made everything feel sleepy and harmless. But the whistle made it feel like the world had tilted 5 degrees off normal, and no amount of rationalizing could get it to tilt back. I swallowed hard, told myself there were 1,000 people in Denver who could whistle that exact melody. But Caleb wasn't 1,000 people. He was one person who'd memorized that tune to a degree that had once felt flattering. Now it felt like a tracker. Inside my apartment, dusk pooled in the corners. I flicked on the lamp by the sofa, its warm light spilling across my thrift store furniture. I locked the door, latched the chain, slid the deadbolt, then checked it again. I stood there longer than I should have, convinced if I listened closely enough, I'd hear that whistle seeping in through the vents. Instead, the fridge motor kicked on with a low hum. The thermostat clicked. Ordinary sounds. Normal apartment. I tried to unpack groceries but found my hands shaking, so I set the bag down and breathed in through my nose until I felt ridiculous. "You're fine," I muttered. "You're safe. He doesn't know where you live." Yet when I went to bed that night, my bedroom blinds, always tightly shut, were open an inch, just enough for someone to peer in. I stared at that sliver of darkness like it had a pulse. Maybe I'd left them that way. Maybe I'd forgotten. But forgetting wasn't something I did since I moved to Denver, not with the kind of vigilance that comes from surviving something you can't quite explain to new friends without sounding dramatic. I slept badly. I dreamed of high school hallways, of lockers slamming shut, of Caleb leaning against the drinking fountain with that half smile he used when he was about to say something he knew would get under your skin. When I woke, my mug, left near the stove the night before, was sitting on the edge of the sink, perfectly centered on a folded dish towel like someone had placed it there gently. I stood perfectly still. The apartment was so quiet, it felt staged. 2 days later, the whistle came again. Little Boy Blue. Drifting from the alley behind the building, I pressed myself against the wall, peering between the blinds. The alley was empty except for a recycling bin and a stray tabby cat cleaning its paw. The wind was low, the air too still to carry sound like that. I didn't see him, but the tune curled upward like a hand tapping on a window only I could hear. I called my parents that night, hoping for grounding, for familiarity. Dad sounded distracted. "It's probably nothing, Maya. Stress can play tricks. You've always been imaginative when you're overwhelmed." "I'm not imagining this," I snapped, then immediately regretted how sharp my voice sounded. Mom chimed in gently. "Sweetheart, maybe try stepping back from work for a bit. You're doing so much at once." They meant well. They always did. But the patronizing patience in their tone made something inside me unravel just a little. A week later, I decided I needed a reset. I drove to their house on the outskirts of Fort Collins, rehearsing how to explain everything without sounding unhinged. The porch light was on, the curtains drawn, comforting, familiar signs of home. But when the door swung open, Caleb stood there, smiling like he belonged. He wore my father's worn gray cardigan. Around his wrist, glinting under the porch light, hung a delicate silver chain I recognized instantly as my mother's necklace. "Maya," he breathed as if greeting a shy friend. "You made good time." My throat closed. "Where are my parents?" "In the kitchen," he said easily, stepping aside for me to enter. "We've been talking. They're worried about you." "I don't understand. How do you know them?" He tilted his head. "We've been helping each other with some things." I backed up a step. The porch boards creaked. My pulse hammered in my ears. When I tried to call out for Mom, Caleb smiled. Soft, reassuring, practiced. "Let's not start with yelling. They said that sometimes you escalate." Something in his voice made my knees wobble. A calm, almost clinical certainty, like he was speaking from a script he'd been reciting for months. And then my mother appeared behind him, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her face soft with worry. "Jacob told us you might be like this," she whispered. Jacob. She didn't even remember his name. I pushed past Caleb and grabbed her arm. Mom, listen to me. That's not Jacob. His name is Caleb and he shouldn't be here. You don't even know him. Something's wrong. Please, just come outside with me so we can talk. She stiffened as though I'd accused her of something unspeakable. Honey, you're scaring me. Caleb stood quietly behind her, hands in the cardigan pockets, eyes soft with manufactured concern. She's overwhelmed, he murmured, like he was helping guide her interpretation, like he'd rehearsed it. Dad walked in from the dining room carrying a platter of roast chicken. What's all the fuss? He asked, trying for casual but tripping on wary. Maya, sit down. We're just having dinner. I'm not sitting down, I whispered. Dad, please look at me. Do you remember who he is? Dad's expression flickered, confusion, then something like pity. That's Jacob, sweetheart. We talked about this. My vision swam. It felt like standing on a sidewalk while everyone else watched a different version of reality, one I couldn't access. I'm calling the police, I said. Caleb exhaled slowly like a parent indulging a tantrum. If that's what helps. The officers arrived 15 minutes later, blue and red lights washing across the house like a warning. Caleb sat at the table between my parents, eating quietly, occasionally humming under his breath. I swear, I heard the faint beginning of the nursery rhyme. The younger officer took me outside. His tone was cautious but firm. Your parents seem fine, calm. They told us you've been under stress since moving to Denver. That's because he's manipulating them, I hissed. He's doing something to them. You don't understand. He used to... Maya, the officer interrupted gently. Nothing here suggests they're in danger. Inside, Caleb lifted his gaze to meet mine. He smiled, just a small one, like he'd already been told the ending of the story and knew I was the only one still hoping for a twist. I drove back to Denver that night with shaking hands and a buzzing in my chest that made each breath feel thin. My apartment felt unfamiliar when I walked in, like someone had been living in it while I was gone. The air smelled faintly of citrus cleaner I didn't own. My phone on the coffee table lit up with a new recording. I didn't press play. I didn't need to. The file name read LBblue_003. The walls felt too close. The vents hummed in a way they hadn't before. Every shadow leaned toward me like it had a message. I packed what I could in 10 minutes and left. I didn't stop driving until Colorado was in the rear view and the highway straightened into miles of empty dark. I found motels, cheap ones, quiet ones where people didn't ask questions. Sometimes I fell asleep with the TV droning, sometimes with the bathroom light on, but every night I woke to a whistle drifting through paper-thin walls. Little Boy Blue. Once in Wichita, I found a folded note under my door. You're getting better at hiding. I'm getting better at finding. I moved motels again. In Santa Fe, the desk clerk said a man had stopped by asking for me. Tall guy, nice smile, she'd said casually. Said he was your brother. I almost corrected her but couldn't force the words out. Brother was simpler than predator. Brother was safer than truth. Last week, I checked my parents' social media from a burner phone. Caleb was in every photo. Thanksgiving dinner, Dad's birthday, Mom's gardening posts, his arm around her shoulder, his hand resting lightly on Dad's back. They all looked comfortable, happy, like he'd always been part of the family. And the strangest part, the part that hollowed me out, was that I wasn't in any of the photos anymore. I wasn't even in the background, not once, as if I'd never existed there at all. Tonight, I'm writing this from another motel, yellowed lamp, humming mini fridge, the smell of stale detergent. There's a draft slipping under the door. I keep listening for footsteps, for a car pulling up, for that tune. It's past midnight now and the room is quiet, but I know how this goes. There's a moment right before the sound begins, when the air changes, just slightly, like something is leaning in to listen to you breathe. And now, from the vent above the bed, drifting soft as dust, Little Boy Blue. I close my eyes, because there's only one truth left. No matter where I run, he's already there. The night my first love returned to me, 4 years after they lowered his body into the ground, rain battered the windows of my apartment in Astoria so hard the glass shivered like it was afraid of something outside. My hands were buried in a cardboard box I'd been avoiding for 2 moves when I found the photo. Cade, 17, laughing like he'd never once tried to control the air I breathed. Rain wasn't the only thing humming in that room. Some old memory stirred too, the kind that carries a metallic aftertaste. Kate had always hated when I locked the bathroom door. He used to text me 50 times if I didn't answer fast enough. Tiny digital knocks that never stopped until my nerves buzzed. People called it young love. I called it gravity. No matter how far I leaned, he found a way to pull me back. A soft tap, tap, tap nudged the quiet behind me. Not from outside, from the closet. The wallpaper rippled as if something shifted inside the wall. Jules stuck her head out of the hallway, brows pinched. "Sutton, you heard that, right?" Every part of the apartment listened with us. Even the rain seemed to hesitate. Jules crossed the room and tugged the closet open like she expected raccoons, but only the smell of old cedar breathed out. Sound returned in layers. Rain first, then distant thunder, then the buzz of our neighbor's voice calling about a power flicker. None of it mattered, because a damp imprint had begun forming on the inside of the living room window. A bare foot, toes pressed into the fogged glass as if someone stood right there, leaning closer. Not 1 inch of me moved, but the temperature shifted. Walls tightened around the room like lungs exhaling. Later, when the apartment settled and Jules went to bed, I lay awake listening to pipes tick like impatient fingernails. A buzzing danced across the comforter. My phone lit the room just enough to see my own reflection. Wide-eyed, frozen, waiting. The name on the screen. CADE. Not an old message. Not a saved contact. A new text. Made it back. Miss you already. Every pixel mirrored a message he'd sent me on our last night before graduation. The night he told me he hated the way I kept secrets from him, even simple things like wanting space to breathe. Thunder rolled over the city. A familiar scent drifted under my door. Cade's cologne, cedar, and something ocean salty. It curled along the floor like fog creeping under a doorway. Darkness dropped when the power snapped off. No warning. No flicker. Just a complete erasure of light. I sat there, not breathing, while stormlight flashed through the window in short, violent bursts. In one of those flashes, a silhouette sharpened against the glass. Broad shoulders, tilted head, one hand pressed to the pane. A whisper slid across the darkness. "Sutton." Lightning dissolved the outline, but the whisper stayed, sinking into the wallpaper. Instinct shoved me to my feet. The room swam, blurred by panic and the sour taste of adrenaline. My hand fumbled at the doorknob, but my motor functions abandoned me. I stood there, locked between fight and flight, like a statue waiting for orders. Stormlight flashed again. The silhouette leaned closer. That broke me. I tore through the apartment, down the stairwell, past Luis, shouting something I didn't register. River wind slapped against my face, cold enough to sting, but my breath only soured more. My car waited in the lot with its passenger door open, interior light glowing like the mouth of a trap. A puddle spread across the seat, dark, thick, smelling faintly of tide water and something rotting underneath. I didn't go near it. I ran until headlights blurred in my vision and Jules's voice cracked my name wide open. 2 weeks later, I left. Most of my belongings stayed behind because the air in that apartment felt like someone's breath warming the back of my neck. Jules didn't question it, just watched me shove clothes into a travel bag with the patience of someone who knew there was no point arguing with trauma. Motel walls became my life next. One room smelled like bleach and wet carpet, another like stale beer and loneliness. At the first one, I overheard a couple arguing through paper-thin walls, their voices rising and falling like ocean waves breaking against cliffs. The TV across the hall flicked through channels without stopping until it landed on a romance movie Kate and I used to watch. That sound, the soft music underneath a sappy scene, made bile rise into my throat. Not fear, recognition. The second night, my phone buzzed again. A voicemail. Static, then breathing, then Cade's voice slipping through the speaker as if whispering directly into my pillow. I never stopped waiting. Horror loosened something inside me. I threw the phone away, but it landed screen up, glowing like an unblinking eye.
Screens became dangerous after that. Blocking numbers meant nothing. Even my laptop turned against me. I opened a blank Word document to write an attempt to feel normal, and watched the cursor begin to move on its own. I never left. Each letter appeared one by one, as if typed by hands cold enough to numb the keyboard. Moving again felt inevitable. Washington, then Idaho, then back west in a desperate zigzag. Yet every time I let exhaustion drag me into sleep, I woke to the same thing. Salt water soaking through the sheets. A smell like drowned wood creeping into my sinuses. The mattress sagged in one spot, the shape of a body settling in, lingering, waiting. One night, the motel TV turned itself on with a sputtering sound. The screen erupting in static before shaping into a faint outline the curve of a shoulder, the tilt of a head. For a split second, it resembled Cade's posture when he used to stand outside the bathroom door complaining I took too long. A knock echoed from that same bathroom door. 3 patient taps. The exact rhythm he used when he wanted me to unlock it. Clarity hit hard. He wasn't haunting the places. He was haunting me. The next day, I tried for normalcy. A coffee shop in a crowded town. The bustle of people grounding me long enough to pretend I belonged to the living again. The barista Eli smiled warmly and asked if I was new in town. Conversation came easy. He made me laugh. Actual laughter. Something inside me loosened, hopeful and shaky. Later, we sat at a park bench under a cluster of bare trees, talking about nothing heavy. For a few minutes, the sky felt too big for ghosts. Then, Eli's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, eyebrows knitting. "Did you send me this?" A text from my number stared back at him. "He can't have you." His pupils widened, then shifted, not in size, in color. A soft, cold blue washed over them. Cade's exact shade, the same one that used to darken whenever I tried to pull away from him. Eli blinked, and the blue vanished. He didn't notice it, but I did. Everything in me broke at the same time. Hope, safety, whatever thin illusion I'd built. I left without explanation, without coffee, without looking back. A new apartment became my last defense. Small, sparse, one window facing a quiet alley. I triple-locked the door, checked the bathroom twice, and tucked my phone under a pillow like that could stop anything. Morning came in a watery gray. My muscles protested every movement as I sat up, the sheets clinging to me with a cold dampness that carried the smell of tide water. Something even colder buzzed on the nightstand. A photo. Just taken. Time stamped 30 seconds ago. In the picture, I was asleep, lying exactly where I was now. Covers pulled up, hair across my face, and a shadow leaning over me, broad shoulders, tilted head, one hand braced on the mattress as if trying not to wake me. The bed dipped beside me. Salt water dripped onto my ankle. A sigh unfurled in the room, soft and familiar, brushing the back of my neck like someone finally settling in. Cade has found me again. And tonight, he won't be standing at the window. I was 30 the October. I moved back into the old Craftsman on Alder Ridge Road, and the moment I crossed the threshold, the air felt like it tightened around my lungs. Not painfully, more like recognition, like the house had been holding its breath for 14 years, waiting for me to step inside again. The scent was exactly as I remembered. Wet leaves, cedar dust, and the faint sweetness of the lemon oil my mother used religiously. It should have felt nostalgic. It didn't. It felt rehearsed. I told myself returning was practical. The house was cheap, familiar, conveniently located. But the truth was uglier. I wanted to prove to myself that I wasn't the broken, terrified girl I'd been at 16 when Liam Porter lived 3 doors down, tapping on my window in the middle of the night, whispering promises and threats with the same soft voice. Back then, I thought attention meant safety. Now, the floorboards groaned beneath my feet with a slowness that felt deliberate, like each plank was considering me. The first night, as I lay in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by half-open boxes, the radiator hummed to life. Not a normal hum, the familiar rhythm I hadn't heard since the winter. Liam last knocked on my window. 3 short, 1 long. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Ta-a-yap. My hand stuck to the doorknob, paralyzed by a sudden, electric cold. I whispered, coincidence, because saying it out loud made the lie easier to swallow. Houses have rhythms. Pipes expand. Heat shifts. But then the knocks came from inside the wall behind my headboard, in the exact pattern. That night, I slept with the lamp on. The second morning, I found my hairbrush propped on the bedroom windowsill, exactly where Liam used to place it after brushing my hair and telling me I looked better when I stayed. Still, I had left the brush in a sealed box in the bathroom. I pressed 2 fingers to it. Warm. Too warm. Not like heat from sunlight, more like body heat. And there was moisture on the handle, a slickness, the faint, sour tang of sweat clinging to the bristles. My stomach pitched low. No, I whispered, and it came out thin. No. I washed the brush twice, dried it, locked it inside the bathroom cabinet. The next morning it sat neatly on the sill again, beads of moisture clinging to the handle. Something was placing it there. Something that wanted to be remembered. By night 3, the house began adjusting itself around me. My sneakers aligned perfectly beneath the radiator in a way I hadn't lined them since high school. The living room smelled faintly of cheap citrus cologne, the exact brand Liam used to douse himself in before climbing up to my window. Gravity seemed to double each time I passed the stairwell, dragging my shoulders down as if something unseen was leaning against me, watching. When Jenna arrived Saturday afternoon with a bag of takeout and the brash confidence of someone who never believed in ghosts, I felt a flash of relief. Someone alive. Someone normal. But the moment she stepped into the living room, she stopped breathing. "Liv," she whispered. "Why? Why is his jacket here?" I followed her gaze. A black windbreaker, Liam's old one, lay draped across the couch cushion like someone had just taken it off. I hadn't touched that couch all day. I approached it slowly, touched the collar. Damp. Not from rain, not from humidity, from sweat. Fresh enough that the warmth was still rising off it, carrying that metallic citrus smell, like steam. Jenna's hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes shimmered with the kind of fear that doesn't need proof. She'd lived through the last year. I dated Liam, the door slamming, the midnight arguments, the way he'd show up places I hadn't told him I was going. She grabbed my arm. "We're leaving. Tonight. Tonight." I didn't argue. I didn't have breath to. While packing a bag, I heard a sound from downstairs, a ringtone, a polyphonic, tinny 2000s melody, a ringtone I hadn't heard since high school. My body ran cold. Jenna heard it too. "Is that my old flip phone?" I whispered. "But it's dead. I haven't charged it in." We crept down the stairs. But the sound wasn't coming from the table. It was coming from my current phone, buzzing on the counter. A text from an unknown number. When I opened it, my vision tunneled. It was a photo of my old flip phone sitting on the kitchen table, lit by the faint glow of my overhead light. The picture had been taken from above, far above. The angle, impossible, unless someone had been on the ceiling or floating inches below it. Jenna saw it and swore. "Liv, get your shoes." We didn't pack. We didn't take anything except my keys. We just ran. Outside, the street was silent except for the distant hum of insects. But behind us, in every window of the Craftsman, lights flicked on one by one until the entire house glowed as if watching us leave. We drove through the night, and I didn't look back. I moved states, new job, new number, a shoebox apartment in Colorado with creaky floors and tenants who minded their own business. For a month, I convinced myself that whatever lived in the Craftsman was tied to the property, to the soil, and the memories embedded in its bones. Without that house, I could finally breathe. But trauma has architecture, and some buildings follow you. The first sign in Colorado was faint, a tapping inside my new apartment's heater. When it clicked on at night, a normal heater would sputter, hiss, or pop. But this one tapped. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap. I pressed both palms to the metal casing. It vibrated faintly like something small and patient was tapping from the other side. Inside, the walls. Inside the metal. Inside the space where heat lived. My throat tightened, not from fear, but from recognition. He had found me. The second sign came when I started unpacking my one suitcase, The same suitcase I'd locked in the trunk of Jenna's car the night we fled. The same suitcase that had never left my sight. When I unzipped it, something small slid against the lining. A cold clink. I reached inside and lifted it out with 2 shaking fingers. My old house key. From Tacoma. Wrapped in a ribbon I didn't own. A slip of paper tied to it in cramped handwriting. I knew by heart. You can leave the address, live. But you are the house now, and I live in you. The room felt suddenly occupied. The air thickened. Shadows leaned closer. And then, from inside, my mattress. Tap, 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 pause. Tap. Not the wall. Not the heater. My mattress. The place where I slept. Where my heartbeat slowed. Where I was bare and defenseless. The tapping matched the rhythm of my pulse. As if something inside the foam was listening. As if it had found the softest part of me. I backed into the corner of the room. Cold from the inside out. Every nerve stretched tight as wire. The mattress gave a single, subtle shudder like breath shifting beneath blankets. My phone buzzed. Another message from the same, unsaved number. A single sentence. Let me in. I dropped the phone. The mattress tapped again, harder this time. Tap, 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 pause. Tap. The rhythm of a first love. The rhythm of a house that remembered me. The rhythm of something that would never stop knocking. And as I pressed both hands over my ears, trying to silence the sound, trying to pretend there was still a version of my life untouched by him, untouched by that house, the tapping grew louder. Inside the mattress. Inside the metal of the heater. Inside the floorboards. Inside my chest. Tap, 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 pause. Tap. Like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. Like a memory learning to breathe on its own. Like a home building itself inside me. Beam by beam. Still knocking. Still waiting. Still asking to be let in. I was 29 the first time Silas Gray appeared in my apartment quietly, impossibly on the night I collapsed on my kitchen floor and cried until my breath broke. I didn't hear a door, a step, not even the whisper of fabric, just a voice drifting from the dim hallway like it had always belonged there. You break so beautifully, Nora. For a full second, I thought my grief had grown a mouth. Then my eyes adjusted and I saw him tall, still, framed by the doorway like a man stepping out of a memory I didn't want. I screamed so hard my throat scraped raw. My back slammed against the lower cabinet, a wooden corner jabbing between my ribs. Silas didn't flinch. His expression held a strange, almost tender, calm, the kind people use when trying to soothe a startled animal. But he didn't reach for me. He didn't move at all. He simply watched, his eyes soaking in every shudder of my breath, every crack in my voice, every tremble in my hands. When the police arrived minutes later, neighbors pounding on the walls, sirens painting my windows red, Silas vanished like he'd never been there. No prints. No footprints on the kitchen tile. No signs of forced entry. The officers exchanged a look I didn't miss. One asked gently if I'd been under a lot of stress lately. I lied and said no. They left me with an empty apartment and a warning to keep the doors locked. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. Part 1. 750 words. Over the following weeks, I tried to rebuild my life in the rigid, brittle way people do when pretending everything's fine. I overwatered my plants. I baked bread I didn't eat. I scrubbed already clean countertops just to hear a noise louder than my own thoughts. The first time he returned, I just hung up after a brutal phone call with my boss. I'd made 2 mistakes in a row. Careless ones. The kind that never used to happen before. The anxiety dug its claws in. When the call ended, I slid down the wall of my hallway, pressed my forehead to my knees, and cried quietly with my teeth clenched, trying not to make a sound. A shadow fell across my hands. I didn't even look up. I already knew. "There you are," Silas murmured. His voice had a warmth that made my skin crawl. I knew you hadn't given up on me. Stop, I whispered. You're not real. You're not. He crouched next to me, close enough that I felt the air shift with him, warm and faintly smelling of something like cedar and cold metal. But when his fingers reached toward my face, as if to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear, I bolted up and ran to the bathroom. I locked the door, my hands shaking so violently I almost snapped the latch. By the time the police came again, the apartment was silent. No prints. No sign of a break-in. Nothing. My mother called that night, her voice soft in a way that made me want to collapse all over again. "Sweetheart, you sound exhausted," she said. "Are you taking your meds? Are you eating?" "I'm trying," I said. It wasn't a lie. I really was trying. Just not succeeding. Silas began appearing only when I unraveled. A panic attack, a nightmare, a moment of stillness too heavy to hold. I never saw him arrive. Never heard steps. Never sensed anything before his voice, impossibly close, would slip into the room like smoke. Sometimes he sat on the edge of the couch, his elbows on his knees. Sometimes he stood near the kitchen doorway, half lit by the weak bulb above the sink. Never smiling. Always watching. "I feel you falling," he'd whisper. "I like when you need me." The worst part was that his tone never changed. He wasn't mocking me. He wasn't threatening. He sounded like someone confessing affection. And I started to feel watched, even when he wasn't there. One night, after a long stretch of insomnia blurred the edges of everything, I noticed the smoke detector blinking oddly. Not the steady red pulse it always had, this was slow, irregular, almost thoughtful. I dragged a chair over, climbed up barefoot, and twisted the casing open. When the cover fell into my palm, a tiny, neatly wired micro camera stared back at me. I didn't scream. I didn't faint. I just froze, a cold emptiness blooming inside my chest. Silas didn't sense my emotions. He watched them. I ripped the entire detector down, then the one in the hallway, then the one over my bedroom door. I tore apart the vent cover next, my hands shaking so badly I scraped skin off my knuckles. I checked every outlet, every corner, every inch of the apartment, until I had disassembled half of it. By sunrise, I'd packed a duffel bag, grabbed my keys, and left the place without looking back. I didn't even lock the door. I just drove. An hour outside Portland, I pulled into a rundown roadside motel with a flickering vacancy sign. The air smelled like rain-soaked asphalt and wood smoke from a chimney somewhere behind the building. "I need a room," I told the clerk, trying not to sound frantic. He nodded politely. "Already taken care of, ma'am." "What?" "The gentleman who came in just before you paid for one under your name." He smiled, like this sort of thing happened all the time. My stomach turned to ice. I didn't come with anyone. Can I cancel that and buy?" He shook his head. "Already checked in. Room 12. My throat closed. I took the key anyway because running felt louder than walking. He didn't follow me inside. He didn't knock. He didn't whisper a single word. That silence was so much worse. I paced the room until exhaustion finally pinned me to the bed. I left the lights on. I left the TV on low. I forced my eyes closed only when they burned. At 3:14 a soft, almost polite shuffling woke me. Not outside, not in the hallway. Inside the room. A slip of paper slid under the door with a whisper of fabric against carpet. I stared at it for a full minute before I forced myself to get up. My legs barely held me. The note was written in delicate handwriting. I never left. A warm rush of terror climbed my spine. When my fingers touched the paper's edge, a Polaroid fluttered out from underneath it. My face stared back, peaceful, asleep. But the angle, the dim line of a cracked closet door, visible in the background. The faint outline of the slats. The photo had been taken from inside the closet. My heart dropped into a hollow pit. I turned slowly. The closet door hung open by an inch. I didn't check inside. I couldn't. Some part of me already knew the truth. I wasn't alone, and I hadn't been since I closed my eyes. I grabbed my keys, my shoes, My bag, I left everything else. I ran to the car, the air outside burning cold against my skin. I drove north, then east, then south, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my fingers went numb. I drove until dawn, chasing the idea of distance like it was oxygen. In the following weeks, I found a new place 3 towns away. I changed my number. I changed jobs. I changed my hair. My therapist said trauma often felt like an invisible passenger, something you learn to live alongside, not overpower. But trauma didn't leave Polaroids. Some nights, when loneliness clawed at my ribs or the quiet became too sharp, I felt a shift in the room's air, a temperature change, a faint sense of being witnessed, not hunted, not stalked, watched with unsettling devotion. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself no one could know when I felt weak, when I cried, when the world pushed too hard. Then one evening, as rain pressed against my windows and the street outside went empty and dark, I heard the faintest breath behind me warm, a fraction too close, like someone leaning in to listen. I spun around. Nothing at all. But the living room felt smaller than it had one heartbeat before. And the corner near the bookshelf held a shadow that didn't quite match the angle of the lamp. I don't scream anymore. There's no point. Silas Gray never hurt me. He never touched me. He never threatened me. He waits. He waits for the moments I break, the moments I falter, the moments my heart stumbles in my chest because life is heavy and I am human. Those moments are his doorway, his invitation. He doesn't come to destroy me. He comes to witness me, to catalog every fracture. Sometimes, when the room goes still enough, I swear I hear him whisper again, soft as breath against skin. You break so beautifully, Nora. And in the glass of the darkened window, for just an instant, I see a second reflection. Still, patient, almost tender, standing just behind mine. I was 31 when I bought the little blue rental on Briarwick Drive in Salem, Oregon, believing a fresh start might finally silence the ghost of my first love. Elias Moore. The sentence had repeated in my head from the moment I signed the lease, a mantra I clung to while loading boxes into the house that smelled faintly of old pine, wet soil, and something tired in the walls like the place had been waiting for someone to love it back. I told myself that someone was me. A new street, a new job, a new version of myself. No more looking over my shoulder. No more checking the rearview mirror twice. No more wondering where Elias had ended up after the restraining order expired. For the first 2 days, the house was quiet in the way I craved soft floorboards, distant freeway hum, wind brushing the gutters. The quiet made me feel safe, like the world finally stopped spinning long enough for me to stand upright. On the third afternoon, while unpacking dishes, a soft voice drifted through the fence. Hey, I'm Alex. Welcome to the neighborhood. I startled, gripping a plate too tightly. When I stepped onto the porch and peeked between the slats, he was already there, tall, unassuming, brown hoodie, a gentle smile. Normal. Almost painfully normal. Sorry, I said. Didn't hear you walk up. I tend to move quietly. He replied with a shrug. Didn't mean to spook you. He held my gaze a second too long. Not rude, exactly, but searching. Curious in a way that made my nerves hum. I forced myself to smile back. Thanks, I'm Tessa. Nice to meet you. His smile stretched just enough to notice. You picked a good house. It suits you. The comment sat oddly in my chest. He didn't know me. No one here did. Still, I thanked him again and shut the door, telling myself I was reading too much into everything. That's what trauma does. It paints shadows where there aren't any. That night, I slept harder than I had in months. The note arrived on my third night. I'd stepped outside to shake crumbs from a kitchen towel when something white caught my eye beneath the welcome mat. A folded piece of paper, thin, unremarkable, except for the neat handwriting pressed into its surface. I'm glad you're back. No name, no explanation. My fingers trembled. My breath shortened. The porch light buzzed above me like an insect trapped in glass. Back. Back to where? Back to whom? I stood there too long, my bare feet chilling on the wood planks. The quiet of the neighborhood felt suddenly artificial, like someone had muted the world just to hear me breathe. I told myself it was misdelivered. Maybe another tenant had lived here before. Maybe someone was trying to reconnect. Logic smoothed the sharpest corners of my fear, but it didn't erase the pulse thrumming at the base of my skull. Inside, I set the note on the counter and walked away from it like it was a snake. 2 nights later, around 11, a flicker in the backyard pulled me from the shower. I wiped the steam from the bathroom window and leaned closer. Moonlight sliced across the grass, silvering the fence, and something glinted. A pinpoint. A shimmer. An eye. An iris stared back at me through a hole no wider than a pencil, so close I could make out the minuscule veins in the sclera. It didn't blink, didn't shift. It simply watched. My breath hitched loud enough to echo off the tiles. The eye vanished a split second later. I dropped to the floor, heart slamming. It took long minutes before I could force myself to stand and lock every window in the house, even ones too small for a child to crawl through. Sleep was impossible. Every creak sounded like footsteps. Every car slowing outside felt like someone choosing to stop in front of my house. In the morning, I marched into the backyard with a mug of cold coffee clutched like a weapon. The hole in the fence was real smooth-edged, carved deliberately, angled perfectly toward my bathroom window. I leaned close. The other side was shadowed, silent. A throat cleared behind me. I spun, coffee sloshing onto the grass. Alex stood by the property line, hands tucked in his hoodie, face composed. Everything okay? The fence. I managed. Someone drilled into it. He stepped closer, peering with exaggerated interest. Looks recent. Did you see anyone out here last night? Every plan? Or gasser? He shook his head. Quiet night. Then, almost too softly, you look just like you used to when you're scared. Cold, threaded down my spine. Used to, I repeated. He blinked, as if realizing he'd misspoken. I just mean you look familiar, like someone I've seen before. I forced a dry laugh. Well, I haven't lived here before. Oh, he said, with a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. I know. The air seemed to narrow around me. A memory rose Elias's voice telling me he loved the way fear sharpened my features, made me honest. I backed away. I have to go. Inside, I double-locked the door, then slid down until I was sitting against it. My pulse thudded in my ears. Had I ever told Alex my last name? Had he seen my mail? My lease papers? Or... No, that was impossible. Absolutely impossible. Elias wasn't here. He couldn't be. But doubt slithered through me like smoke. That night, I packed a small bag, left lights on in every room, and drove to my mother's house in Eugene. When I pulled into her driveway, I exhaled for the first time in days. For a week, I slept dreamlessly, ate actual meals, helped my mom repot her succulents and folded laundry while listening to old jazz records. The world felt breathable again. My heartbeat found a slower rhythm. Safe. I felt safe. The illusion lasted exactly 7 days. I was drinking coffee by the window when a moving truck rumbled onto the street. The engine's low growl was ordinary enough. Delivery men, new neighbors, life happening. Then I saw him. Elias stepped out of the passenger side with a slow, deliberate confidence that made the air in my lungs turn granular. No hoodie, no disguise. Just himself, unchanged in the ways that mattered. The subtle curl of his hair, the squared shoulders, the ease of someone waking into a world they believed they owned. He wore my mother's gardening gloves. Mud smudged the fingertips. My mug slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor, spraying coffee across the tile like dark water from a punctured artery. He looked up, met my gaze across the street, lifted a casual hand, almost polite, almost neighborly. I told you. He called softly, voice carrying across the quiet morning like a private message meant only for me. I always find you. My skin crawled so violently, I felt outside my own body. My mother rushed into the room. Tess, what happened? I need to go. The words scraped out. I didn't explain. Couldn't. I ran upstairs, grabbed my bag, and locked myself in the bathroom. My breath fogging the mirror, my hands trembling uncontrollably. A knock sounded on the front door. Solid. Familiar. Mom answered, her friendly tone fading into confusion. Can I help you? Ilias's voice slipped through the house like a draft. I'm looking for Tessa. My mother stiffened. She'd heard enough stories over the years to understand more than I ever wanted her to. She's not available, she said firmly. A pause. Then, oh, I think she is. A small sound escaped me. Not quite a sob, not quite a gasp, just a broken piece of air. I cracked the bathroom window and scanned the outside. Below, cold concrete, no bushes, no trellis. If I jumped, I'd break something. Maybe everything. Footsteps creaked on the stairs. My legs moved before my brain did. I darted into my childhood bedroom, shoved the dresser in front of the door, and crouched beside the bed. My heartbeat felt like it might burst through my ribs. Tessa, he called through the wood, the same gentle tone he'd used when coaxing me into forgiveness years ago. You know I didn't come here to hurt you. I pressed my hands over my ears. The world dulled, but didn't disappear. You left without saying goodbye, he continued. That wasn't very kind. I came all this way because I missed you. My mother shouted from downstairs. I'm calling the police. Oh, my mother rode. Bange. And my mother won. Bange. Elias's tone shifted, frustrated, cold. You shouldn't have done that. A door slammed. Heavy footsteps thundered down the stairs. A struggle. My mother shouting. Something breaking. A low grunt. Then silence. Horrible, cavernous silence. I shoved the dresser aside, cracked the door, and listened. Nothing, not even breathing. I forced myself down the staircase, each step threatening to give out beneath me. In the hallway, a trail of potting soil smeared across the floor like dragged footprints. The front door hung slightly open. Mom stood by the porch, shaking, phone in hand. Elias was gone. No car, no truck, no footprints in the yard. But the porch light flickered, as if someone had brushed past it a second earlier. When police arrived, they did what they always did, took statements, nodded sympathetically, promised patrols. They searched the neighborhood, found nothing. As usual, Elias had slipped through cracks larger than the law could fill. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with every lamp on until dawn, my mother beside me, too scared to close her eyes. The next morning, when the sun finally rose pale and weak over the neighborhood, Mom stepped outside to water her plants. She froze. Tessa, she whispered. I rushed to the porch. The fence across the street had a small, perfect hole, carved through it, smooth-edged, angled directly at my mother's house. Through it, a single shiver of reflected light blinked. An iris. Watching. Waiting. Claiming. And I knew no distance, no house, no state line would ever be enough. Elias didn't follow me. He preceded me. Every place I chose had already been chosen for me. The porch light flickered again. The eye didn't move. And I finally understood. I wasn't escaping him. I was walking exactly where he wanted me to go. I was 30, the winter. Ryan O'Connell reappeared in my life, just as I was settling into my new place on Willowcrest Avenue in Bend, Oregon. And from the moment I opened the door, something in me whispered that I should never have answered it. The air behind him smelled like cold metal and wet pine, like he'd walked straight out of a forest instead of a cul-de-sac. He smiled too warmly, the kind of smile that trespassed into your personal space. Isabel. Wow. Small world. His voice carried that soft, earnest tone I remembered from college, the one that once made him seem trustworthy, steady, harmless. but there was an unfamiliar gravity in his eyes now. A kind of practiced concern, as if he were already studying my weaknesses. Inside, my living room still smelled faintly of cardboard and newly assembled furniture. I offered him coffee because that's what you do when someone from your past stands on your stoop, claiming coincidence. He declined, but stayed standing in the doorway, hands in his coat pockets, like a man waiting for an invitation he already intended to accept. I moved nearby, he said. Couple streets over. Saw your car. Thought maybe it'd be good to check on you. Check on me? I hadn't seen him in almost a decade, but I laughed it off, because laughing is easier than confronting something you don't yet understand. That night, snow whispered against the windows. A single street lamp outside flickered like a dying heartbeat. I tried to forget Ryan's sudden reappearance, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw how tightly he'd watched me as I talked like he was cataloging every twitch of my mouth. 3 nights later, the front door rattled at 2:13 a.m. Not knocked, rattled. Hard enough that the deadbolt trembled in its housing. I sat frozen on the couch, half wrapped in a blanket, heartbeat ricocheting against my ribs. The sound stopped as abruptly as it started. Silence spilled in dense, suffocating. After what felt like an hour, but was probably 30 seconds, I grabbed my phone with shaking fingers. I should have called the police, but fear scrambles logic. It reaches for the nearest thing that feels familiar. I called Ryan. He answered on the first ring. Isabel, what's wrong? Someone tried my door. They shook it hard. I'm coming. For mine own. I didn't even finish the sentence before the line went dead, and within minutes, headlights washed the front windows in a harsh, swinging arc. He pounded on the door, breath visible in frantic bursts. It's okay, he insisted, as soon as I cracked it open. I just happened to be out. Thought I'd swing by. Just happened to be out at 2 a.m. Just happened to be minutes away. Just happened to answer a call on the first ring. He swept through my living room like someone searching for danger he already knew wasn't there. When he turned back, his expression softened, warm, almost relieved. You're safe, Isabel. With me here, nothing's gonna happen. The way he said it made my scalp tighten, like the reassurance was the point, like the fear itself was the thing he was nurturing. The next week brought the black SUV. Always the same one. Always the same distance. Always behind me when I left work, turning when I turned, slowing when I slowed. I told myself it could be anyone. A neighbor, a delivery driver, someone with a similar route. Coincidence lives everywhere if you want it to. But then I told Ryan. He listened with an intensity that made me feel like prey confessing to its hunter. He held my hands tightly, thumbs brushing my knuckles, gaze locked to mine like I was something fragile he'd been appointed to guard. It's probably nothing, he murmured. But if it happens again, call me. No hesitation. I'll come get you. Almost tender, almost comforting, almost. But there was a hunger behind the softness. A quiet thrill he didn't bother hiding. The 5th night, the SUV followed me. I pulled into my driveway and sat trembling behind the wheel. The SUV stopped at the end of the street, idled for a breath, then eased away. I whispered, "Why me?" with no one to hear it. And for the first time since the door rattled, I was furious, not scared, not helpless, furious enough to think clearly. I went inside, locked every deadbolt, and opened my dashcam app. Half expecting nothing, half expecting everything. What I saw hollowed me out. Ryan's car, his exact license plate, was parked a block from my office 10 minutes before I left. He idled with headlights off. When my taillights appeared, he eased into motion, trailing me at a distance. Every night, same slow creep, same careful timing. It wasn't random. It wasn't coincidence. It was choreographed. My hands shook so violently I almost dropped the phone. My breath came in shallow, cracking pulls. Every memory of him, the concern, the sudden arrivals, the warm reassurances sharpened into something predatory. I drove to the police station because surviving meant acting before thinking. Officer Delaney barely looked at the footage. His face tightened with recognition, at Ryan's name. "Isabel," he said quietly, sliding the phone back to me. "Ryan's father is my lieutenant. I'm not saying you're lying, but be careful with accusations like this. People misunderstand situations, especially when they're scared." I stared at him, unable to speak. He looked away first. That was the moment I realized I was alone, structurally alone, and that whatever was happening, Ryan had been building carefully, deliberately, like a man, crafting his own necessity. That night, I fled. No plan, no bags, just my purse and keys, and a frantic spiral of thought. I unplugged the dashcam and tossed it under the passenger seat. My hands shook so hard, I nearly sideswiped a mailbox pulling out. I drove 2 hours to Corvallis with the heater blasting, windows fogging from my breath. I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror for the first hour. When I finally did, the road was empty behind me, just a long black ribbon trailing into nowhere. My mother woke when I arrived, startled to see me at the door, shoulders stiff with worry. She tucked me into the guest room like I was still 15, still breakable, still hers to protect. I didn't sleep. Every creak of the house tensed my spine. The next morning, sunlight slanted warm and yellow across the kitchen tiles. Mom poured coffee, brow pinched with concern. She glanced out the window, then stopped, mid-sentence. Her voice dropped. "Sweetheart, someone's been parked across the street for over an hour." My stomach iced over. I forced myself to look. And there he was. Ryan, leaning against his car, one foot propped against the bumper, hands in his pockets like he'd just finished a casual errand. He waved an almost tender, patient smile curving his mouth, like he'd known exactly where I'd go, like he'd been waiting for me to run so he could find me again. He mouthed, slowly, "You're safe now." And that was when the truth carved itself into me, with surgical clarity. Ryan didn't want to hurt me. He wanted to save me. But for him to be the savior, I first needed to be in danger, a danger he was more than willing to create. I backed away from the window, heart thrashing against my ribs. Mom asked if I knew him. I heard myself lie. No, I've never seen him before. Because somehow, instinctively, I knew the truth. Naming him out loud only made him stronger. And as his smile widened through the glass, I realized something worse, something that made the room tilt, made my breath falter. He didn't just want me to need him now. He wanted me to believe I always had. And the most terrifying part? A small, exhausted piece of me cornered, sleepless, unraveling, almost did. I was 27 when I moved to Denver, for what I thought would be the cleanest break of my life. Even now, when I replay those first days in my head, they feel bright and brittle sunlight bouncing off fresh snow, the sharp, nose-pinching air of January, the thrill of stepping into a city where no one knew my name. I remember thinking, that anonymity tasted like freedom. I remember believing the worst parts of my past were finally sealed behind me. Back then, my apartment on Blake Street smelled like new paint and cold drywall. That sterile scent that makes you feel like you've stepped into someone else's life by mistake. I unpacked slowly, methodically, trying to turn the space into something warm, something mine, and for a little while, it worked. I'd make coffee early, listening to the hum of the streetcars below, the soft clatter of commuters on the sidewalk. I'd walk to Valinor Analytics, cheeks stinging from the wind, feeling strangely unburdened. For 2 weeks, Marcus Reed never crossed my mind. His voice didn't echo in the back of my skull. His phrases didn't replay like splinters. I slept through the night, something I hadn't done in years. A clean break, a new life, a whole new version of me. Then the small things started. At first, I blamed the Wi-Fi. Denver buildings are old, walls are thick, routers misbehave. That's what I told myself when my laptop began hesitating. Long, unnatural pauses before loading my inbox, little hiccups before switching tabs. The kind of thing you shrug off unless you've lived with someone who weaponized technology the way most people weaponize anger. One night, while finishing a report, my email window flickered. A draft opened by itself, an empty message addressed to no one. I frowned, hit delete, went back to typing, but the cursor moved on its own. 3 words appeared. "You're predictable, Chloe." My hands froze above the keyboard. My breath stuck halfway up my throat. That phrase, Marcus's phrase, his favorite accusation, anytime I tried to leave, tried to hide something, tried to live without him, didn't belong in my apartment, in my brand new life, on a machine I'd bought after leaving him. I shut the laptop so hard, the screen rattled. The next morning, I convinced myself it was a glitch, a stuck key, autocomplete gone rogue. Anything logical, anything comforting. I clung to those explanations like a life raft while I walked to work, my boots crunching over a thin layer of ice on the sidewalk, my breath fogging the air. But the day after that, I found the folder. It sat in the far corner of my desktop, a tiny digital square labeled, "You always leave things behind." My pulse hammered as I opened it. Inside was a single file, a keylogger report dated 3 years earlier, around the time when Marcus still lived with me. But I recognized the entries. My old passwords, old conversations, old plans, stuff he could have never known unless he'd been reading everything, even back then. My jaw went numb. A refrigerator-like hum filled my ears as I sat there staring at the screen. Unable to breathe, unable to think. It made no sense. I'd bought this laptop after I moved out, after I blocked him, after I disappeared. So how the hell? Someone knocked on my apartment door. Hard. 3 quick raps, like the knock of someone who knew exactly how I'd react. My body turned to ice. "Package," a voice called. Just a delivery guy. But my heart didn't settle for hours. 2 days later, the true horror started. I stepped into the lobby at work, badge in hand, still rattled by the folder discovery. And there he was, Marcus, standing at the check-in desk with a visitor badge clipped to his jacket, smiling like he'd been rehearsing for weeks. "Small world," he said, breezing past me into the elevator as if we were old friends running into each other at a grocery store. His cologne, subtle, woodsy, familiar, hit me like a punch to the ribs. I couldn't force my legs to move. He got off on my floor. By Friday, he was hired. Same department, same floor, same team, as if we'd planned it together. HR didn't believe me when I told them he'd followed me. Coincidence, they said. Denver's a big city, Chloe. And Marcus had already talked to them, apparently out of concern, warning them I struggled with stress-induced paranoia. The word paranoia clung to me like a stain. Security brushed me off too. When I told them he was appearing under my apartment window late at night, they shrugged. "People come and go," they said. "It's a busy block." But I knew what I felt. I knew how the air changed when he was near, tight, electric, suffocating. Every part of my life began glitching. My meeting invites vanished from my calendar without warning. My badge failed every other morning, requiring Marcus to happen to be there, to let me in. My screen went black whenever I approached my workstation, only to flicker back to life when Marcus walked by, tilting his head with that nauseating, pitying smile. "You're not yourself here, Chloe," he said once, voice gentle like a trap. "But I can help." The way he said help made my skin crawl. At home, the digital disturbances escalated. My smart lights flickered at odd hours. My phone vibrated with phantom notifications. Apps opened by themselves. Documents rearranged. My Spotify cued songs Marcus used to play during arguments. Soft, gentle tracks meant to calm me down, to lull me into silence. One night, I woke up to find my laptop open on the coffee table. The screen glowed in the dark. A cursor blinked at the end of a sentence I hadn't written. "You're slipping again, but I can hold the pieces." I packed a bag that night. I drove without a destination. The steering wheel slick beneath my hands, my entire body trembling. The highway unspooled in front of me, cold, endless, lit only by the occasional passing truck. Colorado blurred into Wyoming. Wyoming blurred into Idaho. I didn't stop until exhaustion forced me into the parking lot of a dimly lit gas station. I slept in my car, keys in my fist. In the morning, my phone buzzed awake. A LinkedIn notification, a LinkedIn notification, a LinkedIn notification. I shouldn't have checked. I know that now. But curiosity is a violent thing. It claws until you open the wound. My profile had posted an update. Not me. Him. Taking a much-needed mental health break. Thank you for your patience during this transition. My photo. My name. My writing style down to the cadence, down to the punctuation, down to the way I phrase gratitude when I don't know what else to say. Comments lined the post. Feel better soon, Chloe. We'll miss you around the office. Take all the time you need. I dropped the phone. It slid onto the passenger seat with a soft thud. My throat closed. My vision swam. I wasn't just being chased. I was being overwritten, replaced, erased. Marcus hadn't followed my life. He'd stepped into it. One password at a time. One message at a time. One version of me at a time. And somewhere in that Denver apartment, the one I abandoned without clearing anything out, my laptop is still sitting on the table, lid cracked open like a mouth about to speak. Sometimes I imagine the glow of the screen lighting the empty room, the quiet click of keys being pressed by hands that aren't mine, the soft chime of notifications. My digital life, breathing without me. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm parked behind different gas stations in different states, I swear I can hear a faint typing sound coming from my phone. Like someone logging in as me, updating my world, finishing sentences I didn't start. Maybe he's still writing as Chloe Davis. Maybe he's already better at it than I ever was. Maybe no one notices the difference. And maybe, one of these nights, I'll look at a screen and see a version of myself staring back, smiling like he used to, typing words I never said, living a life I no longer own. I left Denver. But Denver didn't leave me. And Marcus, he never had to follow. He just had to sign in. I knew something was wrong the moment I saw the lemon-yellow notebook sitting on the floor of my dorm room, like it had grown there overnight. Not because of the color bright enough to glow under the cheap overhead light, but because I hadn't bought anything that shade in my life. I was the kind of girl who owned muted tones, soft grays, the navy blue of community college hoodies. Yellow had always felt too loud, too cheerful, too exposed. But the notebook was open, its spine cracked like someone had been writing in it moments before I walked in. I froze in the doorway, my keys still warm in my palm. A draft crept from the window, lifting the corner of one page, making it flutter with a soft papery hiss that made my skin crawl. It sounded almost like breathing. The rest of the room was exactly as I'd left it. My fleece jacket slumped over the desk chair. My half-finished sociology outline spread across the bed. The faint citrus smell from the cleaning wipes I'd used that morning. Normal. Completely normal. Except for the notebook. I set my backpack down slowly, as if sudden movement might startle something. The lamplight caught on the glossy cover, making the yellow look almost wet. My pulse thudded under my jaw. "Hello?" I said softly, like an idiot, like I expected someone to answer. No one did. I took the smallest possible step toward the notebook. The carpet gave under my sneaker. My throat felt strangely tight, like the air had thickened. As I got close enough to kneel, I noticed handwriting on the open page, tidy, looping cursive. Not mine. My name was at the top. Mara, Lane 7, 2 a.m. Woke up after 3 alarms. Rubbed left eye first. Checked front window before going to bathroom. Brushed teeth for 47 seconds, too soft, she's worried it's bleeding. Wore the gray sweater despite telling herself she'd choose something different today. My mouth dried out. This wasn't a joke. No one knew those things. No one saw me brush my teeth. No one could have watched me choose the sweater I'd pulled on out of habit. Not preference. My entire chest felt too small to hold my heart as it slammed against my ribs. I flipped to the previous page with trembling fingers. 11:23 p.m. Mara turned off her lamp but didn't fully close her closet door. She never does. She hates the sound the hinges make. My stomach dipped sharply. That was true. Stupidly true. I reached for another page, then another. Every entry was about me, my routines, my tiny private habits, the way I chewed on the end of my pen when I read something confusing, the number of minutes I spent in the shower when, anxious, my spine tingled, a cold line down its center. Someone had been watching me. My eyes burned as I snapped the notebook shut. I didn't mean for you to see that. I whipped around so fast the room spun. Sarah Jenkins stood just inside the doorway, her fingers loosely hooked around the strap of her pale pink backpack. She'd been in my psych lecture all semester, quiet, gentle, the girl who always smiled like she was apologizing for taking up space. We'd spoken twice, maybe 3 times. But she looked different now. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Sarah, what is this?" My voice cracked embarrassingly. She stepped inside and closed the door with a soft click that felt louder than the fire alarm. "I track things," she said, almost bashful. "Patterns, people, behavior. It helps me understand things better." "That's Sarah. This is insane." My breath shook. "How long have you been doing this?" Her eyebrows lifted slightly, as if confused by the question. "Since you moved in. You're interesting." My pulse hammered so hard I saw spots. "Have you been in my room?" She didn't nod or shake her head. She simply looked at the notebook in my hands. "I thought you'd find it eventually. I wanted you to understand that you're safe. I know you better than anyone else does." She stepped closer. I stepped back. The window rattled against a gust of November wind, the thin pain groaning. Sarah's hair moved slightly with the draft, brushing her cheek. "You left your notebook in here," I whispered. "It wasn't left." Her voice softened. "I placed it where you'd see it when you were ready." My stomach lurched. "Get out." Her eyes didn't waver. "Mara, people disappear when they're not understood." Her tone was gentle, almost affectionate. "I don't want that to happen to you." Every hair on my neck rose. I lunged for the door, shoving past her. She didn't try to stop me. She just watched me run, watched me fumble for the hallway, watched my panic spill out of me like breath in winter. When I glanced back, she was still inside my room, hand resting lightly on the lemon cover. Her head tilted the slightest bit, like she was committing something new about me to memory. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't go back to that room either. 2 weeks later, I moved off campus with a girl from my stats class. I filed a report with campus security, who logged it, shrugged, and told me to call again if anything actionable happened. And it didn't. Not for years. I carried the memory like a bruise under clothing, sore, but hidden. But the real fracture came later. 5 years can trick you into believing healing is the same thing as forgetting. By then, I'd graduated, moved 3 states away, picked up a job at a nonprofit, new apartment, new friends, new grocery store, new everything. Sarah Jenkins became the kind of nightmare you mentally blur on purpose, like a traumatic dream you convince yourself you exaggerated. The lemon yellow notebook was the one detail I couldn't shake. Its color haunted me in random places, in the school supply aisle, in an ad banner, in the rubbery glow of a crossing guard's vest. Yellow began to feel like a warning, but I told myself, she moved on. You weren't that important. She's probably in therapy. She probably barely remembers you. I believed that until the morning I unlocked my car in the office parking garage. The concrete echoed with the low hum of fluorescence, the kind of buzzing that settles behind your ears. My heels clicked against the ground as I walked to my sedan, pressing the unlock button twice out of habit. The handle was cold in my grip. The metal smelled faintly of rain. I slid into the driver's seat. Something brushed my shoulder, a soft, feathery touch, like fabric. I flinched violently. The lemon yellow notebook was sitting open on the passenger seat. I stared at it, willing it to make sense, willing the moment to reshape itself into something rational, like a coworker's prank or a forgotten childhood item. But I hadn't unlocked the passenger side. I never used that door. My breath condensed on the cold air. The overhead fluorescent flickered once. The pages were filled with my handwriting, except it wasn't mine. It only looked like mine, like someone had practiced it perfectly. Mara starts her commute at 8:11 a.m. She checks her rearview mirror 6-8 times between home and Garden Street, always more when she thinks someone's behind her. The next line. She's been sleeping less. I can tell by the way she holds her coffee, shakier on Thursdays. The next. I missed her birthdays for 4 years. I won't miss this one. My throat tightened painfully. At the bottom of today's date, in the same neat loops as the pages I'd found years ago, were 5 words that made my fingers go numb. I still love your rhythms. My vision tunneled. I looked around the garage, the pillars, the shadowed corners, the ramp that curved up to the street. A car door slammed somewhere above. A distant engine rumbled. But down here, in my section, everything was still. Someone could be behind any of the concrete columns, watching, recording, writing. I grabbed the notebook with both hands, shaking so hard the pages trembled. The faint rustle filled the silent car, soft, repetitive, almost soothing. The same papery hiss I'd heard the day I first found it, a sound that no longer meant study notes or quiet reading, a sound that meant intrusion, a sound that meant Sarah. I snapped the book shut and nearly dropped it. A chill slid down my spine like an ice cube tracing each vertebra. The realization hit with suffocating force. She had been inside my car, inside my space, inside my life again. A vibrating buzz broke the silence, my phone in my bag. I fumbled and pulled it out. One text, unknown number, a photo. My hand clamped over my mouth. It was me, sleeping, in my bed. Taken from inside my bedroom, close enough to see the small crease on my pillow, where my face pressed into the fabric. Under the photo. Forgive the angle. The door hinge squeaks now. 3T. I dropped the phone as if it burned. My apartment keys sat heavy in my coat pocket. Were my locks tampered with? Was she watching when I showered? Did she whisper to herself while I slept? My breath collapsed into panicked, sharp exhales. I scanned the garage again, but the shadows only deepened. There was no movement, no voice, just the fluorescent hum and the echo of my pulse. I should have called the police, should have run back upstairs, should have screamed. Instead, I sat inside my unlocked car with the notebook on my lap, listening. Because beneath the hum of the garage, beneath the mechanical thump of a distant elevator, beneath even my heartbeat, I heard it. A soft, slow turning of paper. Not mine. Somewhere in the garage. Somewhere close. Someone was writing. And they weren't finished. I don't know if Sarah Jenkins wants me dead, or watched, or preserved like a specimen she refuses to release. I just know the sound of turning pages follows me now through my apartment walls, through the stairwell at work, through the corridors of every parking garage. Somewhere, she's still writing my life. Waiting for the moment I stop trying to escape, waiting to see if I'll disappear too. I knew something was wrong the moment Claire brushed a leaf off my coat, like she'd been rehearsing the gesture for years. We were standing outside Powell's on a gray Portland afternoon, the kind of day when the sky presses low enough to feel personal. I hadn't seen her since high school. I hadn't thought about her in years, not in any serious way. But there she was, Claire Waverly, all confidence and cool certainty, smiling like she'd been waiting for me to arrive. "You'll have time for coffee," she said softly, her fingers barely grazing my sleeve. You weren't really headed anywhere. Something in my body locked, not fear, something quieter, a pause in the machinery of myself, like she'd pressed a button. Her smile widened a fraction, as if she'd seen that exact reaction printed on a page. I told myself it was coincidence. People say things in future tense all the time. I tried to laugh it off, to keep my voice light when I said, "You always did assume things." "I don't assume," she said. I remember. She didn't explain what that meant. She didn't need to. She walked ahead of me into the cafe without checking if I'd follow. I did anyway. Inside, the place smelled like burnt sugar and rain-soaked wool. The windows were fogged from the crush of people trying to stay dry. She wove through the crowd with the same fluidity she always had, like her body recognized the world before her eyes did. We sat. She ordered my drink without asking. She remembered everything. "I'm not staying long," I said. "You'll stay," Claire whispered, not unkindly. "You'll want to hear what's changed." The way she said it pulled at me, like an invisible cord tightening around old memories. I tried to keep my guard up. I told myself I was in control. But something about her voice, its quiet certainty, kept nudging at decisions before I made them. We talked a little. Harmless things. The kind of surface-level nostalgia people dip into when they don't want to disturb something buried. But whenever I'd hesitate, she'd fill the silence with something that hadn't happened yet. "You'll cancel your plans tonight. And oh. You'll stop seeing him soon. You'll call in sick tomorrow." Every time, her eyes stayed calm, expectant, like she was watching for confirmation of a prophecy. And the unsettling part? She was always right. At first, I chalked it up to coincidence paired with her uncanny ability to read me. Claire had always been observant in a way that felt microscopic. But the more time we spent together, the more the world around me seemed to realign itself with her predictions. Friends texted me apologies for things I never mentioned. A coworker congratulated me on working things out, with clear information I hadn't shared with anyone. My landlord asked if I needed help moving furniture. When the time came, I didn't understand how she slipped into the seams of my life so easily, how she turned strangers into extensions of her script. One night after work, I walked down my apartment hallway and heard her voice right outside my door, low and conversational, as if speaking to an old friend. "You'll be handling the paperwork soon," she told my landlord. "She'll be moving in with me by the end of the month." My landlord, who barely made eye contact with me most days, just nodded, like he'd heard it all before. My pulse hammered. I stepped back into the stairwell and waited until her footsteps faded before going inside. Something had shifted. Something big. The next morning, my apartment felt wrong. Too empty, too clean. The walls were bare, photos gone, my journals missing. Even the stack of unopened mail I kept on the counter had vanished. All that remained was a single envelope addressed in her handwriting. Inside was a printed schedule. My schedule. For the next month. Each day was mapped out with unnerving precision: meals, errands, work tasks, even the things I hadn't planned yet. And midway down the list, in gentle serif font, "On the morning of the 18th, you'll finally understand. You can't live without me." I dropped the paper like it burned. I didn't pack. I didn't double-check anything. I just left. I drove north until the Willamette River fog became Spokane sunlight. Until my hands stopped shaking. Until my brother's couch felt like a bunker and my phone felt like a bomb. I turned everything off, deleted every account. For a week, the quiet felt like recovery. Then my brother knocked on the doorframe, frowning, his phone held out like something contaminated. "Wise, your girlfriend posting about you?" My blood iced. He showed me the screen. Claire's social media, newly active. A photo of me taken from behind, walking into his apartment. Caption: "She'll come home soon. She always does." Quote: Tenster. My brother looked at me strangely. "Did you move back in with her? She's saying you're starting fresh." "Where?" Behind him, the hallway light flickered slowly, rhythmically, like a pulse. And, as he spoke, a notification popped up on my phone, even though every account had been erased. Invitation, created by Claire Waverly. Our reunion, tomorrow at 6 p.m. My finger hovered over decline, but my muscles wouldn't obey. Part 2 is approximately equal to 750 words. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her smile, low light, catching the edges, revealing a certainty that felt older than she was. Like she'd already lived this moment enough times to be bored by it. My brother tried to talk to me, but every word felt muffled, like I was underwater. The edges of his sentences kept slipping. Maybe you need to. Maybe she's just, you're scaring me, you know that? I couldn't tell him the truth. Not all of it. Not the part about how my mind wasn't fully mine anymore. The deeper truth sat sour in my stomach. A part of me wanted to go to the reunion. Not because I missed her, but because the thought of not going felt impossible, like trying to hold my breath indefinitely. I walked outside before sunrise, just to breathe air that hadn't been arranged for me. The street was quiet. Frost dusted the windshields. Some distant truck rumbled through the valley. For a moment, the world felt untouched. Then, I heard quiet footsteps behind me. I told myself it was a neighbor, a jogger, someone normal. But when I turned, no one. The street was empty. Still, the sensation lingered. The unmistakable feeling of someone walking in sync with me. 3 paces behind. I forced myself back inside. Forced myself to think logically. She couldn't know where I was. She couldn't reach me. I had cut every tie. I had vanished myself. But that certainty frayed when my brother's roommate came home with groceries and, passing me in the doorway, murmured, "Claire said you'd be nervous." I froze. He blinked at me, confused. Did I say something wrong? I just meant, she messaged my girlfriend. Said you were anxious but on your way to fixing things. My breath thinned. Claire had never met him, never had access to him. But she was speaking through him anyway. The day crawled by. I felt her presence like static, always on the edge of hearing, always just behind the next thought. Every sound made me flinch. Every shadow felt like a prediction creeping into form. By late afternoon, I realized something horrifying. My body had begun preparing for the reunion, even without my consent. I'd showered. I'd changed my clothes. I'd paced the living room like I was waiting for a ride. I slammed my back against the wall and slid down, pressing my hands to my scalp as if I could cage my thoughts. "Stop," I whispered. "Stop it. Stop telling me what I'll do." But the more I resisted, the stronger the pull became. At 5:41 p.m., my phone buzzed. Not a notification. An alarm. One I hadn't set. A single line filled the screen. Minander, AC, Minander. Leave now. I threw the phone across the room. My brother shouted from down the hallway, asking if I was okay. I didn't answer. I couldn't. A tremor had started under my skin. A vibration like my nerves were rewiring themselves. And then, a knock. Soft, knuckles gliding down the wood. Not demanding, expectant. My breath snagged. My brother stepped into the hall. "You expecting someone?" Another knock. Same, gentle, pattern. He moved toward the door. "No," I croaked. But he was already turning the knob. The door swung open. For a split second, all I saw was dusk light pooling on the porch. Then Claire stepped forward, hair pulled back, eyes steady, posture impossibly calm. She looked exactly as she had outside Powell's, like the days between had been edits she'd chosen for pacing. "You're ready," she told me. My brother stiffened beside her, eyes glazing over with a softness I'd never seen. Like he'd been rehearsed too. "Hey," he murmured, smiling faintly. "You didn't tell me she was sweet." My heart slammed against my ribs. "Get away from her," I whispered. Claire tilted her head, studying me the way someone studies a skittish animal. "You'll understand soon," she said quietly. "You've always come back to me. You just forget between drafts." Drafts. The word hit me like a plunge into icy water. "Come home," she continued. "You're tired of resisting." My body jerked a fraction toward her, against my will. Like a puppet tugged by a string, I dug my nails into the hallway carpet. No. But she only smiled, soft, inevitable. Behind her, streetlights flickered, one by one, in a slow wave down the block. A pulse. My brother's roommate came to the doorway, staring at Claire like she was an old friend. Neighbors stepped out of their apartments, drawn by some silent cue. Their faces were calm, expectant, as if she'd already whispered their lines. "Everyone always cooperates eventually," Claire murmured, "you included." My muscles twitched. My throat tingled with the shape of a response I hadn't chosen. I grabbed the doorframe, anchoring myself. Something sharp inside me rebelled, an instinct older than memory. "I'm not coming with you." Her expression didn't change. She simply reached into her coat and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. She placed it on the floor between us. Then she stepped back. I stared. My name was printed at the top. Schedule for the next year. Hundreds of lines. Meetings, moves, relationships, thoughts, fears, breakdowns, recoveries. And, at the bottom, December 2nd, you will stop resisting. You will walk to me on your own. My breath scraped my lungs. That was today. A long silence stretched between us. Claire smiled. Not triumph. Recognition. Like she'd seen this moment before. Like it had already happened. The hallway lights flickered one last time. A slow, steady pulse. And deep inside me, something leaned forward. Not my mind. Not my will. Something quieter. Something already written. Claire held out her hand. And the part that chills me the most, my foot lifted. Just slightly. But enough. As if the decision had been made already. I moved to London with a suitcase full of sketches and a heart bruised from Edinburgh's damp streets. Breakups, I had learned painfully, weren't just emotional, they echoed in the corners of your life until you no longer recognized your own reflection. Camden Passage, with its narrow alleys and flickering street lamps, was my attempt at a fresh start, a place where no past mistakes could haunt me. Freelance illustration paid the bills, but loneliness clung to me like winter fog. Then came Sebastian. Our connection began with casual messages, his words flowing like water, effortless, calm, and disarmingly warm. He described himself as an architect who restored abandoned buildings, and I, skeptical but lonely, found myself smiling at the thought of someone so meticulous. Our date was set for a late autumn evening at the Glass Finch, a small bar tucked between narrow cobblestones, its lights soft, golden, and almost forgiving. When I arrived, his smile was easy, the kind that makes strangers feel like old friends. Conversation started cautiously, with jokes about past dating disasters and the inevitability of awkward first encounters. I laughed at stories I knew I shouldn't find funny, my nerves slowly melting. His voice, calm and measured, filled the gaps in my anxious thoughts. I almost felt safe. Almost. It wasn't until I bent to pick up my scarf that my eyes caught the edge of a black leather case. Under the table, a toolkit, half unzipped, lay there like a secret waiting to be discovered. Curiosity overrode my social instincts. I nudged it open. The contents made my stomach. Seized scalpels, bone chisels, a small saw, and a blade marooned with what I hoped wasn't fresh blood. The air thickened, and when Sebastian returned from the restroom, there was a shift I couldn't place. His smile, once comforting, felt too perfect, his gaze hollow. Leaning forward, he whispered something about people revealing their true bones when uncomfortable. My laugh came out trembling and high-pitched, the kind you use when the brain screams, "Run." I didn't yet run. I pretended to check my phone, pretending to be engaged, my heart hammering, in a rhythm that demanded escape. The evening had tilted somewhere between charm and danger. The line was gone, and I wasn't sure I would survive crossing it. I forced myself to breathe, focusing on something, anything, mundane, the soft flicker of the candle, the distant hum of the bar. Sebastian returned, sitting down with a casual grace that now seemed rehearsed. I asked about his work, hoping to anchor the conversation in normality, but his answers were clipped, controlled, almost like he was measuring me. I realized I had to leave. My client crisis excuse felt hollow even as I said it aloud. But it was enough to buy a moment. Sebastian offered to walk me out. I hesitated, something instinctively screamed at me, but his offer sounded polite, almost gentlemanly. That's when I noticed his arm brushing mine, his hand resting on my elbow just a second too long, too firm. The alley leading to Camden High Street was narrow, walls slick with rain, shadows pooling. Where the lamps barely reached, Sebastian leaned in, voice a whisper near my ear. "If you ever touch what's mine again," he said, a cruel, strange warmth in his tone, "you won't recognize your reflection afterward." My scarf brushed against him, flicked like a fly from his sleeve. Every instinct screamed to break free. I did. I tore myself from his grasp, legs pumping as I ran toward the dimly lit street where the crowd thinned. My hands fumbled for my phone. 999 was dialed with trembling fingers. I spoke, voice cracking, giving a fragment of the encounter, hoping they'd understand. The police arrived, and the search began. But there was something disorienting in the CCTV footage. His face blurred in every frame, as though reality itself conspired to hide him. I moved apartments the next week, bought a personal alarm, and tried to reorient my life. But every sound, the scrape of metal against concrete, the echo of construction, made my heart stutter. I started sleeping with lights on, curtains drawn, imagining him waiting in the shadows, a master of abandoned spaces far beyond the blueprint he claimed to restore. Fear became a companion I couldn't shake. I learned that some moments don't leave you, they linger, invisible, whispering that safety is never permanent, that the world can tilt on a dime, and the most charming person can hide the most dangerous secret. Life resumed, or at least I tried to make it so. I returned to my sketches, the streets of Camden, familiar but no longer comforting. The city's pulse had changed, the cobblestones held echoes of that night. Every architectural line, every abandoned doorway I passed, reminded me of the tool case and its contents. I told myself it was paranoia. Maybe Sebastian had a twin, or maybe the shadows were my imagination. Yet, at the periphery of my vision, I started noticing details that made my skin crawl. A rolled leather shadow outside a flat window, the metallic glint of a tool half hidden behind a dumpster. I couldn't explain why my stomach dropped each time, but I couldn't unsee what I thought I saw. One evening, walking past a construction site, I froze. The clang of metal against concrete was deafening in my mind. Memories of his whisper, his hollow gaze, the blade with the maroon stain, crowded my senses. My fingers found the personal alarm in my pocket, and I pressed it, absent-mindedly, feeling a fleeting sense of control. I considered what had happened. Why him? Why that night? Maybe it was chance. Maybe. Some people wear masks, and some masks hide darkness we are never meant to see. I realized the importance of trusting instincts. Fear, I understood, wasn't always irrational. Sometimes it was survival signaling in the only way it could. I started carrying myself differently. I walked faster, looked around more, and avoided being alone in places that made me vulnerable. Social interactions became calculated, my natural warmth now tempered with caution. I knew it wasn't ideal, but safety required vigilance. One night, lying in bed with the lights on, I sketched the scene, the bar, The toolkit, the whisper. Drawing it out made it tangible and controllable. Fear, in some ways, had become a medium, shaping my art, shaping my awareness, and teaching me that darkness exists not just in others, but in how we react to it. Time, they say, dulls even the sharpest memory. Months passed. I rented a flat with a roommate, began illustrating steadily, and gradually reclaimed the streets. Camden became less a place of terror and more a landscape of resilience. I refused to let Sebastian's shadow dictate my life entirely. Yet, the city whispered, construction sites, alleyways, and empty cafes were no longer neutral. They were reminders of vigilance. I became skilled at reading spaces, gauging danger, and moving without inviting attention. Each encounter, each glance over my shoulder, reminded me that survival required awareness, not fearlessness. One evening, I ran into someone charming at a gallery opening. My instincts screamed caution, and I listened. I smiled, polite but reserved, gauged his intentions, and walked away when something felt off. My first date with Sebastian had taught me lessons I never wanted, lessons in reading subtle signs, in trusting gut instincts, and in valuing personal boundaries above convenience or charm. The world hadn't changed. People could still smile and harbor danger. But I had changed. I had tools beyond instinct, awareness, precaution, and the ability to escape. The night no longer had to own me. I owned my path through it. Some nights, I still hear the scrape of metal against concrete in my dreams. I wake up sweating, heart racing, scanning the shadows for shapes that might not exist. But I am no longer helpless. I carry lessons etched deeper than fear. That charm can conceal violence, that vigilance is not paranoia, and that courage is sometimes simply choosing to move forward despite the tremor in your hands. I sometimes sketch Sebastian's silhouette, imagining what might have been, but the sketches are controlled now. They are studies of survival, not panic. I remind myself that life gives us choices, and while we cannot always control the intentions of others, we can control our response, our boundaries, and the tools we keep ready. The city feels safer not because danger has vanished, but because I am aware, prepared, and unwilling to let charm blind me again. Safety is a craft, like architecture, like illustration, careful, deliberate, structured, and sometimes the most important restoration we perform is on our own lives. Moral. Danger often hides behind charm, but instinct and vigilance are life's true tools. Courage isn't fearlessness, it's surviving, learning, and reclaiming your life after darkness brushes against it. I had been running on autopilot for months, trapped in a cubicle that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and old carpet. My life had become a sequence of meaningless meetings, corporate jargon, and the quiet desperation that builds when you realize the ladder you're climbing is leaning against the wrong wall. The merger had been the last straw, a toxic cocktail of lies, ego, and subtle threats. I quit one dreary Wednesday, and the moment I closed the office door, behind me, the silence of my flat felt like both liberation and accusation. I didn't know what to do with freedom, except to avoid sitting at home and staring at my own reflection. That's how I found myself at Kunsthaus Grau, standing in a hall lit by neon installations and polished steel sculptures, pretending to understand the avant-garde art that surrounded me. I wasn't here for the art. I was here because someone, somewhere, had convinced me that social exposure might be healthier than silence. The gallery smelled like cheap wine, varnish, and desperation in designer clothes. I nursed a glass of white, my eyes scanning the crowd for someone whose presence wouldn't make me recoil. And then I saw her, Isabel. She was leaning against a steel wall, emerald dress catching the harsh gallery lights like a beacon. There was something unreadable about her, a quiet confidence that felt almost dangerous. Our eyes met briefly, and I felt the odd, unsteady pull of recognition, like I had known her in another life, or maybe just the life I wanted to live but couldn't admit to. We started talking, exchanging cynicism for companionship. Corporate life makes people sterile, she said, sipping her wine like she had thought it through 10 times over. It's amazing how quickly people will gaslight themselves to feel relevant. I laughed, a dry, relieved laugh, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel entirely alone. She listened with intent, scanning every micro-expression, nodding as if she could see the unspoken words I didn't even know I had. The room fell away. This wasn't a first date, it was a rescue operation of sorts, and neither of us seemed willing to admit it. She suggested we step out to the sculpture courtyard. The air hit me like ice, a sharp contrast to the warmth of the gallery. Neon lights bounced off the metal sculptures, giving the space a ghostly glow. Isabel's presence was constant and unnerving. She asked about my work, my life, my fears, and when I stumbled, she didn't offer comfort. She analyzed, probed, dissected. "You've been running," she said suddenly, voice low, almost clinical. "You think leaving will erase what happened inside those walls, but you carry it, all of it." I laughed nervously, unsure if she was teasing or making a statement so dark it could be true. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket, a meme my brother had sent. I barely looked at it before. She snatched it from my hand. Her calm demeanor snapped. "You're lying," she hissed. Her smile disappeared like someone had erased it. "I recognize coded messages. You're part of a network. You're lying to me." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "It's just a meme. My brother sent it." Her hand shot out, gripping my collar, trembling with anger. "Don't manipulate me like they did," she whispered, sharp and jagged. The air between us was suddenly too heavy to breathe. Before I could respond, she shoved me against a steel installation. Pain exploded along my jaw, the metallic edge biting through my confusion. She leaned in closer, whispering that she knew how to erase liabilities because she had done it before. The words made no sense until fear rooted them in possibility. I stumbled back, adrenaline burning, and swung a heavy spotlight stand blindly. It connected with her shoulder, buying me a moment to escape. The courtyard had transformed into a maze of shadows and neon, and I ran, lunging toward the emergency exit. Outside, the cold night air felt like an ally, even as panic threatened to overtake my thoughts. By the time police arrived, Isabel was gone. The gallery guards confirmed she had slipped through a restricted loading bay, leaving only a faint whisper of chaos behind. The officer who interviewed me leaned closer, voice low, almost conspiratorial. Her passport number matches a red notice alert. Corporate espionage, high risk. Escaped from Zurich 3 months ago. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. I wanted to convince myself this was a coincidence, a hallucination, a story I would someday tell over whiskey with a grim chuckle. But the reality was, staring me down, I had walked into a nightmare dressed as a first date. Sleep didn't return easily. Every creak in my apartment sounded like Isabel, every shadow a potential ambush. I moved my furniture against doors, double-checked locks, and yet the sense of her presence was inescapable. My mind replayed the night, over and over. The cold steel, her eyes, the whispered threats. I hadn't just survived a violent encounter. I had glimpsed someone who could erase liabilities, and me, had she decided, could have been one. I contacted my brother, who laughed nervously when I recounted the story. "Are you serious?" he said. "Sounds like a movie." I wasn't sure it was a movie anymore. I remembered the look in her eyes, the precision in her panic, and the kind of calm that masked lethal experience. This wasn't a story. It was a warning. Weeks passed, and I managed to secure a new job, a new flat, and finally, a semblance of normalcy. Copenhagen felt safer than Vienna, though I never admitted aloud that I had moved. To hide, not just to work. Still, every night at 10:15 p.m., a shiver ran down my spine. I could almost hear her steps on the cobblestones outside my apartment. I told myself it was paranoia. I told myself that the world didn't operate on cinematic conspiracies. But deep down, I knew that sometimes danger doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it waits for you to feel safe, to let your guard down. And then it reminds you what unfinished business really means. Months later, I was walking to work under a light drizzle, umbrella shielding me from the cold. Copenhagen sky. Life had settled into a predictable rhythm, emails, meetings, occasional drinks with coworkers, but the memories of Isabel never fully receded. I noticed subtle signs. A stranger's gaze lingering too long, a shadow moving unnaturally fast, the faint echo of someone analyzing my every micro-expression. One evening, I visited an art gallery, almost unconsciously, drawn to neon lights and steel. Installations, perhaps searching for closure, or maybe testing my nerve. And, for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw her an emerald blur against the white walls. I froze, heart thundering. "Leo?" A soft voice called behind me, but it wasn't her, just a fellow gallery-goer. Relief washed over me, followed by a heavier, bitter realization. The fear Isabel had seeded didn't require her presence to flourish. I had carried it inside me, an invisible shadow haunting every decision, every glance, every night. I started journaling obsessively, writing down every memory of that night, dissecting every word, every gesture. It was a form of therapy, though I sometimes wondered if obsessing on her behavior was just feeding the very paranoia I wanted to leave behind. Yet writing offered clarity. I realized I had been living in a world of assumptions, assuming safety, assuming civility, assuming that shared cynicism meant shared trust. In time, I rebuilt a semblance of myself. I learned to accept that unpredictability and danger were not punishments, but truths of existence. You could plan, you could prepare, but sometimes, survival demanded intuition and action over understanding. Years later, the memory of Isabel remains a sharp, quiet warning. I tell the story to friends, colleagues, anyone who will listen, though I rarely include her real identity. It's always about a moment of danger disguised as normalcy, a first date, an ordinary evening, a life that suddenly teeters on the edge. The moral, I've come to realize, is not about fearing others, but about respecting unpredictability. People are capable of more than we imagine good or bad, and assuming otherwise can be dangerous. Trust should be cautious, and freedom should never be taken for granted. I learned that courage is less about confronting danger and more about recognizing it, surviving it, and learning to rebuild without letting fear dictate every choice. Some nights, when the streets are empty and the air cold, I still hear footsteps outside, but I know. Longer run immediately. I pause, take a breath, and remind myself. Life is both fragile and resilient, and survival is not about erasing fear, it's about moving forward, even when it lingers, even when it waits at the edge of your vision. Life is unpredictable, and danger can appear in the most ordinary moments. Trust cautiously, recognize fear without letting it control you, and rebuild your life with courage, awareness, and resilience. Survival is as much about intuition and action as it is about wisdom and patience. I had made a rule for myself after months of heartbreak and quiet desperation. No more married men. I swore off the kind of late-night texts that lingered like smoke, the kind that left me staring at my ceiling, wondering why someone could be so careful with their heart while being careless with mine. But loneliness has a sneaky way of eroding convictions. It was early spring in Geneva, drizzle, misting the streetlights outside my apartment, and I was about to break that rule. One last time. Alexander had seemed harmless when we met online. Tall, impeccably dressed, a hedge fund partner with a smile like he'd stepped straight out of a magazine. My rational brain screamed at me, yet my heart whispered otherwise. The idea of one dinner seemed safe. I could tell myself I was in control. Magnolia House was more romantic than necessary for a first date. Dim chandeliers, velvet drapes, quiet violin music that hovered like a secret. Alexander arrived early, holding the door. With a gentlemanly flourish, eyes scanning the room before locking on mine, he complimented. My coat, my hair, my laugh, everything precise, rehearsed, almost unnervingly perfect. I let myself smile. For the first time in weeks, I felt seen. We talked about travel, favorite books, and the allure of uncharted cities, but there was an undercurrent I couldn't name. Every so often, his gaze would flick to the entrance as if he were waiting for something or someone. I noticed it but ignored it, too desperate to enjoy a normal conversation. Halfway through dessert, I excused myself to the restroom, and that's when the first warning landed. On my way back, the maître whispered urgently into his phone, "Yes, she's here." He came with another. My stomach flipped, I froze, and then the front doors slammed open. Genevieve moved with terrifying precision, tall and ice-cold, a storm made flesh. Alexander went, rigid, as though frozen mid-charm, and the world seemed to slow. I should have run then. Instead, I stayed. Genevieve didn't scream, didn't even hesitate. She lifted a crystal tumbler like a weapon and smashed it against Alexander's jaw. The crack of glass and bone echoed across Magnolia House, leaving diners stunned and frozen. He sank into his chair, blood spreading across his white collar, eyes wide as if realizing for the first time that life had consequences. I bolted, but instinct didn't guide me far. Genevieve was faster. She cornered me near the wine cellar corridor, her grip like iron, voice trembling with controlled fury. "Do you know what you are?" she demanded. "The newest replacement in a long line of frauds." Her words hit me harder than the reality of Alexander's bloodied face. I opened my mouth to speak, but fear tangled my tongue. She dragged me toward the service hallway, shoving me against metal crates, shaking so violently I thought she might snap. She threatened to mark my face, a chilling promise meant to terrify, and for a moment, I felt smaller than I'd ever felt in my life. Two kitchen workers intervened just as she swung a broken bottle toward my cheek. Security followed quickly, pulling her back while Alexander whimpered, trying to convince everyone it was just a misunderstanding. The surrealness of it all left me shaking, a mix of disbelief and the visceral, growing panic of realizing I'd walked straight into someone else's chaos. The police arrived minutes later, lights flashing, voices commanding, questions rapid fire. I gave my statement, voice trembling, recounting the night with every detail, every lie I had believed. From Alexander. It was the first moment I truly understood the extent of deception I had willingly ignored. By the time I left Magnolia House, my coat soaked, hair plastered to my forehead, I was a mess of adrenaline and shame. Alexander's smooth, charming persona had shattered alongside the crystal, revealing a truth I could no longer ignore. He wasn't who he said he was. That night, I sat in my cousin's apartment, trembling with a cocktail of horror and regret. I couldn't sleep. Every time a car backfired or a glass broke in the street, my body flinched. I deleted every dating app I had, fingers shaking as I tapped uninstall, the finality hitting harder than any confrontation. I replayed Genevieve's words over and over. "He always finds another. Don't be foolish. Enough to be the next." The sting of them lingered, a cold, sharp reminder of the dangers of blind desire. I had been reckless, hungry for attention, validation, and affection, ignoring every subtle sign of duplicity. Friends called, concerned, but I felt too exposed to talk. The world seemed too loud, too bright, too full of questions I wasn't ready to answer. Alexander's betrayal felt like a weight I carried in. Every small motion, every glance over my shoulder, every hesitation in trusting someone new. I began noticing the patterns in hindsight. The compliments too polished, the timing too precise, the way he always avoided personal questions. My loneliness had been weaponized against me. It wasn't just the danger of sleeping with a married man, it was the danger of stepping into someone else's fire without knowing how hot it burned. For days, I replayed the night at Magnolia House in fragments, the smashing glass, the icy glare of Genevieve, Alexander's pleading eyes. I realized I hadn't been a victim of one person's wrath, but of my own willingness to ignore red flags. Weeks later, I started rebuilding life in small, deliberate steps. I focused on work, on friends, on experiences that didn't revolve around romantic validation. I took long walks in parks, learned to cook meals that nourished more than just hunger, and spent quiet evenings reading instead of scrolling. Each small act was a reclaiming of control I had unknowingly surrendered. I thought about dating again, carefully, like touching a flame at a distance. I couldn't erase the memory of that night, nor the fear that came with it, but I could choose how it shaped me. I learned to ask questions, observe patterns, and trust instincts over charm. Vulnerability didn't have to be reckless. Desire didn't have to blind. Even interactions with strangers carried caution. I listened more, watched more closely, and allowed skepticism to temper hope. It wasn't cynicism, it was self-preservation. And slowly, as weeks turned into months, the panic faded, replaced by a cautious confidence in my own judgment. Months after that night, I stood in front of a mirror, examining the subtle marks left behind, not just on my body, but on my psyche. Magnolia House felt like a distant memory, yet its lessons were permanent. I realized the danger had never been just Alexander, or even Genevieve. The danger had been my willingness to enter a life I hadn't fully understood, seduced by surface-level charm and my own loneliness. The moral hit me in the quiet moments. Desire without discernment can be perilous, and ignoring reality for temporary validation can be dangerous. Boundaries matter. Observing red flags matters. Trusting your instincts matters. And most of all, protecting yourself emotionally isn't selfish, it's necessary. I didn't hate Alexander. He was merely a cautionary tale I had lived. Genevieve's wrath was terrifying, yes, but it was the clarity I needed. That night at Magnolia House forced me to confront a truth I had been avoiding. Some fires aren't meant to be entered, and the bravest act can sometimes be walking away. Now, I move forward cautiously, wiser, and more attuned to the subtle rhythms of human behavior. I no longer chase validation. I no longer ignore intuition, and I no longer promise myself rules I don't intend to keep, without first respecting the fire I might step into. True strength lies in self-awareness and boundaries. Desire without discernment can be dangerous, and protecting oneself is always worth more than fleeting approval. I had sworn off dating after the breakup, the kind that leaves you feeling like a hollow echo of yourself. Weeks had passed, and Leon's gray skies matched my mood, but when Mateo smiled at me over a stack of vintage postcards at the flea market, something inside me stirred. There was no pretense, just an easy warmth in his eyes, and a soft-spoken voice that made the world feel a little quieter. He suggested dinner at a small Algerian fusion cafe on Rue de la République, a street alive with weekend shoppers, buskers, and the faint aroma of roasted nuts. I hesitated, scanning the bustling sidewalks, wondering if I was ready to let someone in, but there was a subtle charm in Mateo's gentle humor. The way he noticed the small things, the way my fingers traced the edge of a menu, the tilt of a street musician's hat. Inside, the cafe was intimate, lamps casting golden circles over chipped wooden tables. We talked about everything and nothing, his love for poetry, my obsession with photography, the awkwardness of student life. For a moment, I felt normal, really normal. I laughed more than I had in months, and he laughed too. The sound, soft and disarming. The waiter brought our dishes: spiced lamb over couscous, a tangle of roasted vegetables, and we shared bites, passing the small plates across the table. Mateo kept glancing at me, those quiet, thoughtful eyes, and I caught myself thinking maybe I could do this again. Maybe I could start over. By the time we left the cafe, night had begun to settle. The streetlights cast long reflections over the cobblestones, and the city's weekend pulse felt alive, but safe. Mateo linked his arm through mine, his touch unassuming, reassuring. But then I noticed a distant murmur, growing louder, rhythmic chants swelling toward the main square. A protest, they said later. Nothing unusual in Leon, but in that moment, the sound felt like the beginning of something unpredictable, something I wasn't prepared for. We paused near the tramline, watching as the protest approached. Flags waved, voices rose, drums pounded. Mateo squeezed my hand. "It's just people venting, Lena. Nothing to worry about." I nodded, trying to believe him, though unease had already settled in my chest. Then the first smoke grenade went off. A sharp hiss, a metallic tang that cut through the evening air. Panic followed immediately, horns blaring, people screaming, and a blanket of thick gray. Smoke rolling toward us like a living thing. The street became a blur of frantic motion. Feet, shoving, people tripping. I gasped, struggling to keep up. Mateo grabbed my hand and yanked me toward a side alley. For a moment, it worked. We dodged a few panicked souls, but then the crowd surged. He was ripped back, and I was left alone, spinning, coughing, the acrid smoke stinging my eyes. Somewhere behind me, a bottle shattered, glass flying, slicing my sleeve. My heart thudded violently, fear tightening around my ribs. I crouched behind a metal bench near a shuttered bookstore, trying to make sense of the chaos. The masked agitators clashed with riot police, flares arcing through the night like fiery snakes. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but the panic was suffocating, the crowd a river I couldn't navigate. I watched a man in a hood aim a flare gun dangerously close to civilians, and I froze, petrified by the randomness of danger. I thought I'd never breathe again, never feel safe. And then, through the haze, Mateo appeared coughing, eyes wide but focused. "Lena, this way," he yelled, pulling me toward a narrow service passage that led to an underground parking lot. Relief collided with terror, my limbs trembling as I stumbled beside him. The underground parking lot was quiet by comparison, the cold concrete walls echoing our gasps and ragged breathing. We collapsed against a pillar, shaking, our bodies pressed together in a way that felt protective yet strange. Mateo's hands were on my shoulders, gentle, but firm. "You okay?" he asked, voice hoarse. I think so," I stammered, trying to steady my racing heart. That was insane. My voice broke. He nodded, the tension evident in his jaw. "Yeah. It's scary how quickly things can spiral." We stayed like that, huddled in the dim light, the distant sirens vibrating through the concrete. No words could bridge the shock, and I realized something unsettling. The first spark of connection I had felt with Mateo was now clouded by fear. Not the soft, warm connection I had imagined, but something raw, chaotic, unsteady. Eventually, the police escorted trapped civilians out. We followed, our steps careful, the street, now littered with overturned trash cans and broken bottles. The cool night felt sharp against my flushed skin. Mateo walked beside me silently. Our fingers brushed occasionally, but the touch felt tentative, fragile. We gave statements to the officers. My voice shook despite my attempts to sound composed. Mateo's hand found mine briefly, grounding me, but there was an unspoken understanding that the night had changed us. Mateo walked me home, the streets eerily calm now. Lamps flickered, distant sirens faded into the background. We talked little, the night's events hanging between us like smoke. When I reached my door, he lingered, hesitating. "Do you want to maybe try again?" he asked softly, a hopeful note in his voice. I forced a smile, shaking my head. "I think we need time." He nodded, eyes reflecting disappointment and concern. I closed the door, leaning against it, feeling the adrenaline leave me in waves, replaced by a strange emptiness. The first date I had hoped would mark a fresh start had become a memory of chaos and fear. The following weeks were difficult. I avoided crowded squares, flinched at fireworks, and kept my phone close, imagining the panic of that night replaying. Mateo tried one more time, another quiet dinner, another attempt at connection, but the memory of smoke and screaming made every word feel forced. We drifted apart, not with anger or blame, but with the quiet inevitability of two people whose first bond had been forged in terror instead of trust. Months later, I still walk Rue de la République cautiously, eyes scanning crowds, heart braced. For unpredictability, I think of Matteo occasionally, wondering if he was ever meant to be more than a fleeting shadow in my life. Sometimes I imagine that he could have been the start of something warm, a companion for the quiet nights of life. But I know now that not every spark is meant to grow into fire. Some people enter our lives to remind us of fragility, of fear, of the randomness that can upend ordinary days. I carry that memory not as bitterness, but as a lesson. Life is unpredictable, and safety, even in simple joys, is never guaranteed. Connection must be nurtured in calm, not forged in chaos. And perhaps that is the hardest truth. Sometimes, the people who share our worst moments aren't meant to be our partners. They're meant to teach us resilience, awareness, and the value of small, quiet normalcy. Life's unpredictability can test our connections, and fear can distort even the gentlest bonds. True resilience and understanding come not just from seeking safety, but from learning to navigate chaos while valuing calm moments and the people who bring warmth without fear. I moved to Marseille because I needed space from my hometown, from my family's opinions, from the relentless hum of people who thought they knew me better than I knew myself. The old port, with its tumble-down cafes and salt-tinged breeze, was my refuge. I had imagined endless afternoons reading by the quay, my hair whipping in the wind, watching ferries trundle lazily across the harbor. My roommates, however, had other ideas. "You need one normal night, Lena. Just one," Camille had said, thrusting Matteo's number into my hand like it was a lifeline. Reluctantly, I agreed. He seemed harmless over text, charming, without being pushy, funny without being loud. We met at La Terrasse du Soleil, a cafe that clung to the edge of the harbor like it belonged. There, its tables scattered over sun-dappled tiles. Matteo was already there, leaning on the road, railing, smiling at tourists, chasing pigeons. His hair was messy, eyes bright, and there was a warmth in his voice when he greeted me that made me almost forget my hesitation. We ordered mint tea, and for a few minutes, I could breathe. We spoke of everything and nothing. Poetry bars where he had worked, street art hidden in alleys, the mundane oddities of our separate lives. I laughed more than I had in weeks. I even forgot, briefly, to keep my shoulders tense. Then we debated the merits of graffiti versus murals, leaning in close, letting our hands brush. Occasionally, it was ordinary, perfectly ordinary, until it wasn't. A thunderous crash erupted from the kitchen behind us, rattling the cups and silverware on the closet table. Patrons froze, eyes darting, expecting a clumsy waiter or a fallen tray. I laughed, nervously, ready to chalk it up to accident, when a second blast rang out. And then came the unmistakable crack of gunfire. Everything froze, then screamed. I dropped behind a wicker chair as Matteo dove beside me, arm over my back. The sound of bullets, wild, unpredictable, shattered the afternoon calm. A parasol tore apart 3 tables. Away, sending splinters flying. The air smelled of sand, tea, and fear. My ears rang, my brain refused to compute. "Stay down," Matteo whispered, and I felt his hand squeeze mine with a force that tethered me to reality. The cafe dissolved into chaos. Dishes clattered, chairs overturned, people screamed. And outside, the alley remained ominously quiet, as if waiting for another explosion. Then silence fell, thick and suffocating. The gunman had fled toward the port, leaving the cafe in an echoing vacuum of shock. No one moved for what felt like hours, though it was probably minutes. When the police arrived, I could barely lift my hands to give a statement. My voice trembled. My body felt like a fragile vase, every motion threatening to shatter me entirely. Matteo walked me home, wordless for most of the way. Our hands found each other again, unconsciously, not out of attraction but survival. My apartment felt impossibly quiet. I replayed every second of the attack, the flashes of movement, the way Matteo had shielded me, the surreal sense that the world was not safe. Not ever again, perhaps. Even days later, I could not step onto the quay without flinching at the sounds of forks clanging or a motorbike backfiring. The harbor, once comforting, now whispered danger in every ripple. 2 days later, Matteo and I agreed to meet again. Maybe, I thought, facing the memory head-on could dilute it, make the fear manageable. We returned to the cafe, hoping the sun-drenched terrace might feel ordinary once more. It didn't. The moment the door closed behind us, a tightness squeezed my chest. Matteo. Cracked jokes, the same ones that had once made me laugh, but they landed hollow. I realized we weren't meeting for connection, we were meeting for reassurance. The chemistry we had tried to build was layered over trauma, and it was brittle. Every glance reminded me of that afternoon. Every shared smile felt forced, artificial. Our texts followed the same pattern, short, polite, increasingly empty. I avoided the old port entirely, rerouting my life to quiet streets and small bakeries. Matteo lingered in my mind, not as a romantic prospect, but as the stranger who had held me when I could not hold myself. Even so, part of me mourned the ordinary evening we had tried to create. An evening that had been stolen by chaos. I wondered, not for the first time, if some moments were irrevocable, if fear could permanently stain memory. Months passed. I saw Matteo rarely, and when I did, it was always under the shadow of the incident. We could converse, smile, even meet for tea, but there was a subtle dissonance, a quiet acknowledgement that the thread connecting us had frayed. The harbor winds, which once brought relief, now whispered echoes of gunfire. My apartment felt like a shell, my safe space punctuated by involuntary memories. I noticed things I had never noticed before, the way strangers' hands hovered near the pockets, the way sudden noises made me flinch. The world was both the same and irreversibly different. Through it all, Matteo remained a quiet presence in my peripheral vision, someone who had anchored me, however briefly. Our bond was no longer about romance but survival, a shared understanding that life could pivot in an instant, leaving ordinary moments suspended in memory. Now, when I walk along the old port, I see the cafe but rarely enter. I see Matteo in my mind, smiling as he once did, and I remember not the fear but the calm he offered me amidst chaos. The world is fragile, yes, but I have learned that connection can exist in many forms, even fleeting, even trauma-bound. Fear has a way of rewriting our expectations, of leaving imprints on ordinary days, but it also teaches resilience, the quiet courage of facing another morning despite echoes of the past. I have learned to carry my memories without letting them dictate my choices, to recognize the bonds that form in crisis as valid, even if they do not fit traditional narratives. Life, I now understand, is not about the flawless unfolding of plans or the assurance of safety. It is about small acts of care, moments of presence, and the courage to return to the world, even when it has scared you. Life's unpredictability can shatter normalcy, but true resilience is found in how we hold and help one another, even if only for a fleeting moment, and in our willingness to reclaim ordinary days despite the shadow of fear. I had told myself I wasn't ready for this, not after Marco, not after the months of therapy, long nights staring at blank walls, and the endless replay of every manipulative word he'd ever spoken. But when Marlene, the gallery patron with the silver hair and a taste for expensive things, insisted I meet Christian, a wealthy investor who supposedly appreciated art in the right way, I didn't know how to say no. Weissenfeld Vineyards was tucked just outside Munich, a perfect spot for someone trying to impress. The outdoor tables stretched along a hill, overlooking vines that shimmered gold under the early autumn twilight. I arrived first, nervously tugging at the cuff of my jacket, scanning the rows of neatly pruned grapevines. When Christian finally appeared, he had that effortless charm you see in magazines, tailored jacket, calm smile, the kind of voice that made you feel you should hang on to every word. Sophia, I presume? His voice was smooth, measured, slightly too polished. I smiled cautiously, extending my hand. "Christian, it's a pleasure." He guided me to the table, charming the staff along the way. He laughed easily at jokes I didn't make, corrected my pronunciation of wine regions without waiting for me to finish, and insisted on ordering for me. "You must try the Riesling," he said, brushing my opinion aside as if I were a man-child who didn't know any better. I felt the familiar twinge of discomfort. The way he talked over me, the way his smile carried a subtle condescension, it reminded me of Marco, but different, more polished, more dangerous. Because it was masked by charm, I shook my thoughts away. Maybe I was overreacting. Dinner continued under the soft glow of lanterns, and the vineyard's gentle evening breeze made the air smell of earth and grapes. I tried to engage him in conversation, but he always returned to anecdotes about deals, investments, and control, never listening long enough to care about my art collection, my exhibitions, or my cautious optimism about life. By the time dessert arrived, I noticed something else. The way he dismissed the sommelier, brushing off questions like the man were an inconvenient servant. I told myself to relax. Perhaps he was just confident. But a tiny voice in my chest whispered, "Confidence can hide more than it reveals." Christian insisted on driving me home. I waved off the suggestion politely, citing the tram and my desire to enjoy the night walk, but he smiled, calm and persuasive. "You shouldn't be out late alone," he said. "It's no trouble for me." I relented, trying to ignore the unease that had settled in my stomach. His car was sleek, black, silent. We left the vineyard, passing softly lit houses, the shadows stretching long across the autumn road. I relaxed for a moment, allowing the charm to dull my nerves. Then, suddenly, the smooth asphalt gave way to a rough dirt path. I blinked, heart tightening. "Christian, are we taking a shortcut?" "This is faster," he replied casually, eyes on the road. The smile didn't reach his eyes. The vineyards, endless and silent, stretched around us. No houses, no lights, just the sound of gravel under tires and the occasional rustle of wind through the vines. I swallowed, feeling the prickle of fear I hadn't let myself feel in months. He began speaking, but the tone had shifted. It was no longer casual, no longer charming. "You. No, reputations are fragile. Some women need guidance before they ruin a man's life." His words were measured, deliberate, designed to make me hesitate, to freeze. I tried to speak, to assert my discomfort, but his presence was overwhelming, calm, controlled, the kind of man who makes others feel like their boundaries are optional. I reached for the door handle instinctively, a tiny rebellion, but he locked it with a flick of his thumb. "Don't panic," he said softly, leaning closer. "I just want your undivided attention." The path seemed endless. My breath came shallow, my fingers tightened around the seat, and then, at last, he stopped. A storage shed loomed ahead, abandoned and dark, the perfect trap, in the middle of nowhere. I felt the weight of isolation pressing in from every side. Christian turned to me, a hand brushing my face lightly. Too intimate, too controlled. I recoiled, slightly, trembling but steadying my voice. "Christian, I sent my location to a friend." I lied, smoothly. "The gallery tracks staff when they leave late nights." For a heartbeat, I saw something flicker across his face. Annoyance, calculation, maybe. Surprise, it was enough. I leaned back, keeping my hands visible, breathing as evenly as I could. He paused, then quietly, almost imperceptibly, put the car in reverse. I held my breath until the tires hit the gravel again, then silently thanked my careful planning, my awareness of every tiny precaution I had taken in recent months. The drive back to Munich was tense, quiet. He didn't speak much, only occasionally glancing at me with a cold smile. When he dropped me at my apartment, he said, "It's a shame, you almost behaved well tonight." I didn't respond. I went inside, locking the door behind me, every muscle tight, adrenaline buzzing. My apartment, normally my sanctuary, felt small, insufficient against the memory of his controlled menace. I knew I had escaped, but the danger didn't leave me. It lingered in the quiet shadows. The next morning, I filed a report with the police. I described everything: the vineyard, the police, dinner, the veering onto the dirt path, the locked doors, the touch that had been too close. But Christian's connections were extensive, powerful. Friends, business contacts, lawyers, they whispered, twisted the story into a misunderstanding. The police sighed, shrugged, and filed it away. It was a bitter realization. Money and influence could shield monsters from consequences. I felt the familiar sting of frustration, of helplessness. But I refused to let it swallow me. I changed my routes home, avoided the quiet streets, and kept a small personal alarm in my pocket at all times. Art became my anchor. Painting, curating, breathing in color and texture. It reminded me that the world still held beauty, even when people's darkness tried to overshadow it. I spoke more firmly, asked more questions, trusted my instincts in every social encounter. I rebuilt the walls that had been cracked, making them stronger, smarter, safer. The vineyards, the sweet smell of grapes, haunted me sometimes. I could walk past a wine shop and my stomach would clench, the memory of silent rows of vines pressing in. But with awareness came power. I was no longer a passive observer in my own life. I had survived, and that survival carried weight. It's easy to underestimate danger when it comes wrapped in charm. Christian was polished, suave, and intoxicating, the type of man who could make anyone doubt their own instincts. But instincts are powerful. They are the mind's quiet alarms, the body's first line of defense. I learned that confidence can be a mask for control, that wealth and status do not guarantee morality. That silence from authority figures does not mean weakness in yourself. Most importantly, I learned to trust my own judgment, to act decisively, and to recognize that survival is not shameful, but courageous. Now, when I walk past vineyards or smell fermented grapes in a shop, I do not cringe. I remember, yes, but I also remind myself that power lies not in fear, but in knowledge, preparedness, and self-respect. The world is full of charming monsters, but when you trust yourself, you can navigate it safely. Trust your instincts. Charm and power can disguise danger, but awareness, courage, and preparedness are your strongest allies. Survival is a skill, not luck. I never thought a Saturday night in Zurich would feel like stepping into a dream I didn't want to wake from. At 24, working as a museum guide, my life had a rhythm that felt safe, predictable, even boring at times. Dating apps had become a parade of arrogance, selfies, and shallow lines. That's why, when Liam's message popped up polite, slightly self-deprecating, and surprisingly funny, I paused. Something about him felt genuine, a relief after the string of overconfident matches. We met at a minimalist rooftop lounge in Saphir Heights. The city sprawled beneath us, cold. Lights of Zurich reflected in the river like glittering glass. Warm lamps and soft jazz music made the place feel intimate, calm. Liam was waiting by the railing, tall, quietly handsome, and just enough awkwardness to seem approachable. "Is this your usual Saturday night haunt?" I asked, sliding onto the velvet chair. He chuckled, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "Not usually, but a friend recommended it. Figured it's a step up from staring at screens all night." I laughed, feeling the tension of my daily life loosen. Conversation flowed easily, his humor subtle, his attentiveness real. I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't expected on a first date. Then Dominic arrived. He didn't walk in, he glided, tall, impeccably dressed, confident in a way that made the room tilt slightly. Dominic, Liam's colleague, introduced himself with a smile that felt designed to charm. He invited us to an after-party at his villa in the Hillside District. Exclusive, he said, only a few guests, a chance to see Zurich from above in a different light. Liam hesitated. I noticed the subtle tension in his shoulders, the brief pause before he answered, but spontaneity coursed through me like electricity. "We'll just go for an hour," I said, pressing his hand. "Come on, it could be fun." He hesitated, then nodded, the corners of his mouth lifting in that quiet, understated way that had drawn me to him in the first place. I didn't realize then that hour would change everything. Dominic's villa was exactly what he'd promised, a living magazine cover. Glass walls reflected the snow-covered hillside. Pools glowed faintly blue under soft outdoor lights. Sculptures, modern and expensive, punctuated the grounds. It was beautiful, breathtaking, even, but something about the quiet staff, the way doors seemed locked, the way a few guests moved, with robotic synchronization, felt off. Inside, the air smelled faintly of citrus and expensive cologne. Guests laughed and rehearsed. Patterns, clinking glasses, with just the right rhythm. Dominic was everywhere at once, smooth and charming, placing a hand on my back as he guided me through the rooms. I felt a small, unnameable tension coil in my stomach, but the music and lights were intoxicating. Liam leaned close, whispering, "Be careful. Watch how he moves people around." I waved him off. "He's just charming." But then I saw her, a girl near the pool, stumbling, eyes glazed with something worse than drunkenness, fear. Dominic appeared beside her, gripping her elbow with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, steering her down a hallway no one seemed to notice. Liam's hand found mine, firm and urgent. "We should leave. Now." I laughed nervously. "It's fine, probably just a little too much wine." His jaw tightened. "Look at her, Isabel. She's scared. That's not wine." For the first time, the glamour of the villa became suffocating. I felt trapped between fascination and instinct, and Liam's quiet intensity anchored me. Something about him, his stillness, his focus made me realize I wasn't imagining danger. We made our way toward the driveway, attempting to navigate past the polished, oblivious guests. Dominic appeared again, casual as a summer breeze, blocking our path with that unnerving smile. "Leaving so soon? The fun's just starting." Liam didn't answer. He took my hand, firm, protective. "Step aside," he murmured, his voice held an edge I'd never heard before, quiet but terrifyingly determined. He moved with precision, guiding me past Dominic and into the cold night. My heart pounded in sync with each step. The lights of the villa glinted off icy surfaces, and Dominic's eyes followed us, calculating. I wanted to laugh it off, to convince myself it was a game of social dominance, a wealthy man playing with lower stakes fears. But Liam's gaze never wavered from the villa. He knew. I felt it. Then that creeping intuition, the one our modern lives so rarely allow us to trust, whispering that Dominic was dangerous. The staff nodded politely as we passed. Every door we walked by seemed more like a cage than an entrance. And then we saw the hallway where the girl had been. Empty now. Too clean. Too quick. A shiver ran down my spine. Liam led me to the car, sliding in behind the wheel, locking the doors. The engine roared to life, and Dominic's casual facade dissolved into something colder, darker, from the rearview mirror. My stomach churned. Fear, real fear, settled in my chest, coiled, waiting. What is he?" I whispered. "He's not what he seems," Liam replied, eyes never leaving the rearview mirror. We just got out. In time. The drive back to the city was silent except for the hum of tires on asphalt. My hands trembled, gripping the edge of the seat. I tried to process everything. The villa, Dominic's charm, the girls, panic. "I can't believe this happened," I finally said. I didn't even see it at first. Liam glanced at me, softening. "That's why I was cautious. I trust instincts. Mine told me this wasn't safe." We parked near my apartment. The warmth of the city felt surreal, like a bubble against the chill of what we'd escaped. I wanted to thank him, to tell him how much I owed him, but the words felt hollow. What we'd witnessed went beyond gratitude. It was survival. The next morning, my phone rang. It was the police. Someone had called anonymously about the villa. A raid uncovered hidden cameras, sedatives, and belongings of women who had disappeared. My stomach dropped as reality cemented itself. We had narrowly avoided becoming part of that evidence. Liam came to my apartment later, bringing coffee and a quiet reassurance that only he could provide. Sitting across from him, I realized that safety wasn't flashy or loud. It was quiet, steady, and perceptive. Liam's subtle, unwavering presence had saved me. Weeks passed, but I couldn't shake the villa from my mind. Luxury and charm could mask true danger, I realized. And predators didn't need shadows. They wore silk and smiles. Dominic received 15 years in prison, but the thought of how close I had been to harm lingered. My relationship with Liam grew in ways I hadn't anticipated. Conversations deepened. Silence became comfortable. Trust, once rare for me, felt natural. Yet, late at night, I'd still wake up, remembering the girl, the villa, the way charm had nearly lured me into danger. I learned something I hadn't known before. Instinct matters, even when reason tries to laugh it off. Safety is not about appearances, it's about presence, attentiveness, and the courage to leave when something feels wrong. Liam taught me that quietly seeing danger before it arrives is a gift, one that shouldn't be underestimated. And for the first time, I understood the difference between thrill and risk, between flirtation and menace, between charm and threat. Life moves forward, but sometimes survival itself is a story worth telling. True safety and trust come from listening to instinct and valuing the quiet strength of those who truly see danger before it strikes. Appearances can deceive, but awareness saves lives. I never thought a simple dinner could feel like stepping into another life, but that night at the East Dockside Cafe, I felt it. The mist rolled over Cardiff Bay in slow, silver sheets, curling around the wooden pilings like smoke from a candle. It had been months since I'd let myself think about dates, let alone accept one. After years of freelance journalism covering everything, from politics to crime, I thought I could handle anything. Yet, the ghosts of my dockside smuggling days had a way of sneaking up, uninvited. Reese was already there when I arrived. He had this quiet presence, the kind that didn't try to impress but made you feel safe. He wore a charcoal sweater and an earnest smile, sitting with his hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. My first thought was, God, he looks normal, too normal for someone like me. Jasmine, it's really nice to finally meet you, he said, his voice gentle but steady. I forced a smile, letting my guard down just enough to allow a flicker of excitement. We talked about books, history, and odd little quirks of Cardiff's waterfront. Reese had a way of asking questions that made you want to answer honestly, without the usual small-talk defenses. I laughed, really laughed for the first time in weeks. There was warmth in it, a rare thing for me. The smell of brine mixed with roasted coffee beans, the fog curling around the street lamps. Outside, and I felt a calm I hadn't felt since leaving that life behind. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe I could be normal, that the past was just a story I had survived, a chapter safely closed. But then Reese excused himself to take a phone call, and I found my eyes drifting to the window. The fog blurred shapes along the dock, and a cold, familiar twitch of anxiety pinched my stomach. He returned, a crease of worry etched between his brows, and suddenly the warm glow of the quote cafe felt fragile, as if it could shatter at any second. Walking toward his car, the night seemed thicker than the mist. My fingers grazed the strap of my bag, a nervous habit I hadn't shaken. I thought I had left the docks and everything they represented far behind. But as we rounded the corner, two dark shapes emerged from the fog. My blood ran cold. Hatch and his crew, the same faces that haunted my childhood in the docks, enforcers of debts, violence, and fear. Memories came in waves, slashed tires, midnight raids, betrayal, and narrow escapes. My chest tightened, my legs threatening to give way, but Reese was already crouched low beside the car. Get down, he hissed, his voice tense but commanding. I froze, unable to speak, the panic clawing up my throat. They moved like predators, knives glinting, iron rods raised. One of them slashed a tire, another smashed the car hood. The fog carried the sounds, twisted them into something unreal, a nightmare stitched into reality. Reese glanced at me, eyes wide, then shoved me into the passenger seat. His hands were shaking as he started the ignition, and I gripped the edge of the door, feeling the car shudder. We tore into the fog, tires squealing on wet asphalt, Hatch and his crew pursuing on foot. The night became a blur of headlights, shadows, and fear. I realized in that moment that my past wasn't a story. It wasn't something I could leave behind. It was alive, and it could follow me anywhere. And despite Reese's bravery, despite the adrenaline pushing me forward, I understood something painfully clear. The people I care about could never truly be safe around me. We finally lost them in an abandoned shipyard. I slumped against the steering wheel, shivering, heart hammering. Reese sat beside me, pale and silent. The reality of what we'd just escaped, pressing down on us. "Jasmine, I can't," Reese whispered after what felt like hours of silence. His voice broke slightly, the weight of fear making him small. "I can't live like this," constantly threatened. I nodded, though my throat was tight, voice gone. Part of me wanted to protest, to say we could. Be careful, that he didn't need to walk away. But another part of me, the part that had survived, long enough to know better, understood. My world was dangerous, and dragging someone into it was a kindness I could not afford to ignore. He left, and I watched his taillights disappear into the fog. I blocked his number before I could reconsider, knowing attachment would only put him at risk. I walked home through the empty streets, scanning every shadow, every corner. The fog no longer held a sense of mystery or romance. It was predatory, and I moved through it like a hunted animal. At home, I collapsed onto my couch, the adrenaline finally giving way to exhaustion. Panic. Attacks came in waves over the next few nights, triggered by the creak of a dock gate or distant footsteps. Sleep was fitful, haunted by the mocking laughter of Hatch, echoing between invisible warehouses. I tried to remind myself that I had chosen this life once, but I had also chosen to leave it. Yet, leaving didn't erase the past, it only made the memories sharper, more insistent. I knew then that some ghosts never truly vanish. They wait, patient, persistent, lurking, just beyond the edge of your vision. And for me, the docks would always hold their shadows. Weeks passed, but the fear never fully lifted. I tried to resume my freelance work, reporting on mundane politics and human interest stories, but the anxiety lingered. Every phone call felt like a threat. Every footstep behind me could be Hatch. I started avoiding the waterfront entirely, preferring quiet cafes in neighborhoods that felt foreign and safe. I thought about what Reese had said often: "You can't share this life and protect someone else." The truth was harsh but necessary. I realized that love and normalcy were luxuries I could no longer afford, not when my past had the power